the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The concerned trolls of the feminist media are very, terribly, awfully, horribly concerned about the conclusion of Johnny Depp's recent lawsuit against Amber Heard. Multiple news outlets used the same phrasing in their headlines, claiming the outcome would have a chilling effect on domestic abuse survivors. No concern was expressed, of course, for the effects false allegations might have on the accused. HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen. The Johnny Depp-Amber Heard verdict has domestic violence orgs worried, screamed the Daily Beast headline of an article filled with quotes from advocates implying that the jury got it wrong and the case will be damaging to abuse victims. Vox labeled it a backlash against the Me Too movement, including mention of it in an article that jumped from feminist issue to feminist issue and labeled the feminist disapproved side of political debate on each one a backlash against something to do with feminism, as if feminism is the default position, and any non-feminist position must be considered some form of apostasy. Teen Vogue used an emotional appeal, setting the stage at the beginning of their article with a description of the writer's experience as a rape victim, and a brief discussion on DARVO attacks, that's deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender, before discussing the case and concluding that the spectacle it created would hinder victims from seeking help. More mainstream establishment news sites repeated the chilling effect talking point as well, each mentioning it in diatribes that in various ways condemned Depp for defending his reputation, his supporters for encouraging him and judging Heard, and the outcome of the case for imposing liability on a woman who had leveled an allegation of abuse. PBS and NBC both discussed memes responding to Amber Heard's subpar acting during her testimony, calling them character assassination and labeling them misogynistic, then predicting that these responses will keep real victims from coming forward. NPR said experts were warning that anti-feminist groups were using the trial to mobilize and that defamation lawsuits were being used to silence survivors of domestic violence. The BBC, which referred to the public response as trial by TikTok, lamented the existence of a growing cottage industry of lawyers and PR consultants who advise young men on how to clear their name after being accused of sexual assault in college, including suing their accusers for defamation. Of course, the article makes no mention of how many of these allegations are false. USA Today quoted the director of a clinic for domestic violence victims as stating that the verdict made a client reticent to pursue her legal claims out of fear that she'd be seen as a liar like Amber Heard. The article heavily implied that any recognition that any one individual woman anywhere can lie will automatically result in the assumption that all female accusers everywhere are lying. The message we're clearly supposed to take from this media campaign is that acknowledging the issue and incidents of false intimate partner and sexual violence allegations is harmful to victims of these types of crimes. We're obviously expected to conclude that in order to protect victims, we must excuse false accusers. But is that the truth? I don't think it is. This subject was my entry point into men's rights activism. My decision was made after years of witnessing friends dragged through the bowels of the criminal and family court systems by liars whose only reason for accusing them was to gain an advantage in the custody and property division aspects of their divorce cases. I've watched this phenomenon damage the reputations, earning capacity, relationships, and mental and physical health of the men around me who are targeted, and I've seen the collateral damage within their families as well. Along with these, every man I know personally who was abused by a female partner has described to me how his abuser, knowing her legal and social power in the situation, used false allegations or threat of false allegations as one of her tools of coercive control. Do what you're told and don't make me angry, or I'll say you hit me and you'll face repercussions for that. The phenomenon of policy-facilitated false allegations is a huge problem that profoundly impacts individual victims. It also impacts our society, which experiences a multitude of more subtle effects, such as damaging the overall relationship between the sexes, as well as extensive and expensive abuse of our criminal justice system. When men's rights advocates discuss this issue, feminists respond with more lies. For instance, rather than recognize that leveling a false allegation is an act of aggression, they minimize the experiences of the accused and try to link the false accuser's status with the experiences of real crime victims. Their talking points on this topic can be mostly distilled down to 6 harmful myths. Number 1, false allegations are rare, so they can be ignored. Number 2, false allegations are harmless, so the false accuser hasn't done anything wrong. Number 3, if the allegation is false, the accused has nothing to fear, so concerned men must be guilty of something. Number 4, even if the allegation is false, the accused is never truly innocent, so he deserved it. Number 5, skepticism regarding allegations is misogynistic if the accuser is a woman, so believe all women. Number 6, admitting some allegations are false hurts real victims, so we can never talk about this problem. HBR Talk will be discussing these 6 harmful myths feminists use to shield false accusers from accountability this Thursday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern with Deborah Powney. You can find links to the discussion on honeybadgerbrigade.com.
And that would be us here and now. So, hello and welcome to HBR Talk 225, 6 Myths Feminists Use to Shield False Accusers from Accountability. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with nonsense annihilator Lauren B. and researcher Deborah Powney to discuss these myths and how they facilitate the use of false allegations as a weapon of coercive control. But first, we gotta do what we gotta do. As always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly instead of relying on any social media platform's tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justthetip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. So remember, folks, information is power. We have it. They hate it. If you want it, you've got to go to honeybadgerbrigade.com and check out the latest feed from the Badgers and feed the Badger to help make it possible for us to share the news and analysis you come to HBR to hear. And you've heard us discuss quite a bit how and why the Depp case broke the wall of public silence around victims of false allegations. Feminists and feminist-sympathetic media are scrambling to try to reclaim that narrative. But, as always, we see right through their shit. And we're here to break it all down for you, beginning with the myth that false allegations are rare. The chicanery behind that claim is quite tricky. When discussing the prevalence of intimate partner and sexual violence, feminists claim that crime statistics severely underestimate their incidence, and we should instead rely on survey data that includes incidents reported to survey takers that were never reported to law enforcement. But when discussing the prevalence of false allegations, they claim we should only rely on statistics from evaluation of incidents that were reported to law enforcement, and they claim that only 8 to 10% of allegations are false, with their actual bottom number being 2%. We get that one shoved in our face all the time, too. And this excludes discussion that has found a broad range of rates, depending on standards and methods of evaluation, demonstrating that the issue is far more complicated than feminists imply. Uh-oh. Are you trying to talk?
Oh, no. I'm just
Okay.
muting myself. Hello.
Hello. Okay.
How you doing? What a week we've had, really, haven't we?
Yeah, we definitely have.
6 weeks we've had. I don't know about you, but when I watched the judgment, my heart was really in my mouth. It was I could not believe the judgment, despite seeing all the evidence and it being overwhelming to demonstrate that clearly Johnny had been defamed.
Yeah.
I still couldn't hold out all the hope that it would go in the right direction until I actually heard it, and I was fist pumping all the way.
Yeah, it was on par with the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict for me. You know, I remember just sitting there watching, and yes, I was doing the same thing.
I was doing that fist pump, giggling. I don't mind admitting I shed a tear or three.
Yeah.
Because to me, and I think I popped this on Twitter, sort of day one or day two, was it was literally like watching my research in live action. Because despite the fact that I've got, when I say data points, bear with me, I'm actually referring to people's stories here, but I've got thousands of data points from men that have been subjected to either a direct mirror of what Johnny was explaining, or at least in parts of what he was explaining. So I must say I did take it quite personally that this has to go this way, because this will just split this rotten nut right through. It will expose exactly the narrative that has got us in this place from the off over the last 50 years. And when they read out that judgment, I really did feel like this is the crack in this history that is going to see the tide start to turn. And although it's horrific what we're seeing from the media, it's also exposing the media as we move forward, that despite seeing overwhelming evidence, not just from Johnny, not just from Johnny's friends or employees, but from law enforcement, from highly qualified doctors and academics, all saying the same thing, yet still an abuser is being reframed as an imperfect victim, and the whole case has been seen as misogyny, and then saying, oh, this was something that was won on social media. And I utterly dispute that for two reasons. I dispute that for two reasons. A, I saw huge amounts of social media talking from Amber's side, but also it clearly wasn't that the social media was influencing the case. It was the case that was opening up people to be able to actually talk about this. And I've had various different messages from various different aspects of how people see domestic abuse. But I have also had a number of, and I'm talking a large number of messages from feminists, self-proclaimed feminists, that have said, I always thought this, but I really couldn't say anything. But now I can. And if we're going to go for equality, we have to accept this. And I think even in their own camp, it's exposed those people that are based in ideology as opposed to evidence.
See, this is one of those things that, even though, like, I always say the same thing, and it's still true. There is no good feminism, right? There's no positive feminism is all predicated on patriarchy theory, and patriarchy theory is, that conspiracy theory. It's not a real theory. It's not confirmed or validated. It's more of it's not even good enough to be a hypothesis. I like Allison's choice to call it conjecture, but it holds
it goes so far against scientific method that you can't disprove it. You can't disprove it because it's untestable.
Right,
it's
right, and it's basically the allegation, right? So it's a false allegation. It's the allegation that throughout history, male society, the male population, have collectively arranged our law and policy and culture and standards, right, in our society, that to give legal social policy power to men and exclude women from it, and so that belief.
The funny thing is I've seen the thing that disgusts me the most about this, the media and the social media and the dogma from particular feminists, and there's two that have really sort of elbowed the way in on this case with Amber's partner and all the rest of it here in the UK. The thing that disgusts me most is the hypocrisy, because they're now harming female victims,
right,
by telling female victims that they won't be believed.
Right.
And I put something on my Twitter account, and I've done it a few times now, where this week I said, to all female victims and survivors of domestic abuse, do not believe this atrocious narrative. You are not Amber Heard. And I find it abhorrent, nth degree, that women, and particularly women that claim to be feminists, are punting out this horrifically abusive and harmful message that is going to keep women in abusive relationships because they've terrified them.
Yeah.
And the only reason they've terrified them is the more women that are terrified, the more proof they have of their bullshit that they're putting out there. And I really have railed against this. I've found myself being really furious that, why would you do that? Why would you say that? And why would you say that anyone that doesn't believe this is a misogynist, when you're infantilizing women that have watched this case, seen the evidence, evaluated that, and thought, yeah, he's right, and so are the jury. And they're decimating people's lives. I don't think they understand. Well, maybe they do understand, which makes it even worse. That if you constantly pump out a message that says you won't be believed now because this misogynistic case and blah blah blah, it's absolutely repugnant. Is the strongest word I can actually think of. It's a stench to high heaven, and they should be absolutely held to account for it.
Absolutely. And then the rest of that is, you have this situation where you have more modern feminists who have this expectation that the things that they were told by the second wave are true, right? So they believe that there's this epidemic of intimate partner violence against women perpetrated by men, and that there is an epidemic of intimate partner of sexual violence perpetrated by men against women, and that women don't engage in either of these types of violence by initiating them, that they do engage in intimate partner violence only defensively, and that it's a rare thing for a woman to engage in sexual violence, when in reality, it's pretty even in terms of sexual violence, and women are more likely to and women are more likely to initiate the types of behaviors that are labeled intimate partner abuse, and they're more likely to initiate intimate partner violence, and they're more likely to get hurt after initiating physical violence. So they're literally
the strength weight ratio,
right?
But we've got actually anyone that comes to me and says, "Do you want to come and talk about this?" I'm like, "Yes." You know, I'm literally going to go out there and just keep saying this. I am not doing what I'm doing based on a belief system. I am doing what I'm doing based on the type of evidence, and probably far more robust evidence, that we've actually seen in court. Everything that I touch is ethically approved, it is peer reviewed, it is supervisor approved, and I am my own worst critic. So I make sure I check things over and over and over, because I'm expecting that criticism. So
and it's good because this is one of those like there's different issues where you can maybe make a mistake and then come back later and say, actually this is the reality. We made a mistake on that, and this is the way we should be doing things. But when it comes to
I should be held to account on that. That's part of scientific message.
Right.
If people point out an error to me, I should be, as much as it might sting, I should be able to, as a scientist, think, right,
this is what I got to fix.
Look at that.
Yeah,
and I actually need to take some feedback from this person that's investigating my data, and maybe work with them to make this more robust.
Right. But I mean, with some research, you're looking at how can we create this new thing for people to use as a tool in their lives, or how can we create this new method of doing something that people have been doing for years and years. But in your case, the research that you're doing is actually has the potential to influence law and policy, and this is something that feminists have been doing for decades, right? So with feminists not being willing to take criticism of their research, and with feminists not being willing, and this is a generalization, because there are a tiny minority among feminist researchers who are different, and they have taken criticism and have in fact engaged in criticism of the prevalent research. So I do want to make a caveat to that, because the researcher that more or less popularized what MRAs had been talking about since 2010 in regard to the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey is a feminist.
Yeah.
But
well, so was Murray Strauss.
Yes.
So was Donald Dutton. So was what's his name that did the boy crisis? That's terrible of me.
Oh yeah, Dr. Farrell, right?
Yes.
So we're looking at, and what happens to these guys when they do this? They get excommunicated from the church of what's happening to women. For an old school reference for the old folks in the chat who remember the Church of What's Happening Now, which you can find on YouTube, by the way. But in any case, this is something that, because they were not willing in the past, for the most part, feminists would excommunicate you if you questioned their prevalence research, and they would emphasize people like Mary Koss, who designed her research to get the statistics she wanted, instead of designing her research to get statistics that were accurate. And that led to law and policy changes in the United States that have created an epidemic of false allegations, an epidemic of false convictions, an epidemic of false allegations on university campuses and students being discriminated against. And there are almost 1,000 lawsuits now. There's like over 700 lawsuits over due process.
I really hope that it gets popped really soon.
Yeah.
And I think I think they're going about it the right way. The best way to stop this is to hit them where the money is.
Right.
And
here's the worst part. Right, the Biden administration is talking about. So we had the Trump administration had Betsy DeVos as the education secretary, and she went through and she did a whole examination. She talked to victims, she talked to false allegation victims. So she talked to victims on both sides of the equation, and she talked to administrators at the university. She talked to attorneys. She talked to people who work with victims and people who work with defendants in cases, both guilty and innocent. She talked to due process advocates. She talked to everybody. And she did an evaluation based on all of that. She looked at the court cases in progress and the rulings that had already happened. And she made a very even-handed set of changes to the policy to bring it into line with the constitutionally protected due process rights of citizens of the United States. And the Biden administration's current education secretary wants to undo all of that. So we're in a situation.
They want to take it back to a kangaroo court.
Yep. So we're in a situation where they want to basically take the tool that DeVos created for the Department of Education to keep this court system that they wanted to create in universities, on university campuses, as a substitute for the real court system, and actually keep it constitutionally compliant, and they want to take it out of compliance with the Constitution, and that's just going to create another set of lawsuits. And the universities are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. And you know me, I'm hard on universities, and in terms of like their curriculum and their exploitation of the fact that their student loans are government backed and cannot be eliminated through bankruptcy and so on. Like, they just never go away. And so this is not like a pro-university bias here. I'm very critical of universities, but they're between a rock and a hard place here because the federal government tells them they have to do certain things, and then they do these things, and then the students have an opening for a lawsuit, and then the university is found liable because they followed federal policy. But if they don't follow federal policy, they're not eligible for federal money. So there needs to be a new situation where the universities file a class action lawsuit against the federal government for creating policy that puts them at a disadvantage in courts because they have to do things that are unconstitutional.
Maybe they need to get together with the parents of that are doing these lawsuits. And actually take it to federal, because the thing that always worries me is the harm that these things do cause. There's not even the potential. We know this happens. A couple of years ago, I was speaking to a father of a boy that had taken his life due to an allegation of rape, and it had been going on for 9 months, and this boy was shattered. It had been going on for 9 months, and then he got a report from the police. And this is no reflection on the police. I have the utmost respect for them. But they, due to resources and evidence and everything else, 9 months in, they came back and said to him, we're still investigating. And this poor boy couldn't take anymore, and he took his life. After he'd taken his life, the girl withdrew her allegation. But then I'm talking to a father who is, his life's over. He's decimated. And I couldn't talk to the mother because the mother's so distraught. She can't, and it's just, I think to myself, somebody needs to be, and it needs to get really personal. It can't just be the federal government. Who signed that paper? Who put their name on that paper? Go after them, because there's this corporate separation and legal separation, like, oh, we just did it according to the law, or we just did it. No, someone put pen to paper or a big rubber stamp on that and said, let's do it. Go after them. Make it really personal, so that every time they look at these laws, they actually consider the potential harm this has.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely sick to the back teeth of everyone separating themselves from something when somebody signed a paper, and it goes against every ethical bone in my body that they don't even consider people. It's worse than cattle. In a lot of respects, cattle get treated so much better because they don't even consider this. Mm-hmm. I don't know what virtue flag they're trying to flag up the pole, or whatever it is, or what belief system they have, but there needs to be some personal accountability going on here.
Oh, there definitely does. But in terms of the first point, before we get into the harmlessness allegation, because that myth is really dangerous as well. The myth that false allegations are rare. There's a couple of things that I want to point out specifically, and that is, you had given us an article when we mentioned the 2% number. That's something that actually has been thrown in MRA's faces for pretty much as long as this issue has been under discussion. So you introduced an article, The Truth Behind Legal Dominance Feminism's 2% False RAIM Figure, by Edward Greer. And I am just going to, it's not visible right now, I'm going to make that visible in our window. Let me just... Oops, not filters. Close.
The pertinent section of this, and I really encourage everyone to read it all. It's written from in the Law Review, Los Angeles Law Review, but pages 954, section D says the 2% false claim figure is unreliable. So if we can cover that, but I do really encourage everyone to download this and print it off, and keep it by their side when that happens.
There we
essentially, go. In a nutshell, and excuse me, I've got if I'm coughing and snuffling,
it's okay.
I've got
Me
hay
too.
fever. So
yeah, pollen is a bitch.
Yeah, it's just floored me this year, but.
Too true. I'm having the same problem.
Please excuse me if I go into a coughing fit or need to blow my nose. I'll just mute myself. But essentially, what's happened in this article is that Edward Greer is done what he labels, and it's a perfect label, some academic archaeology, and this is something that I was always encouraged to do when you're examining existing literature, which is always take the steps back to the original source, because everyone adds their own interpretation. Everyone takes various different elements of it and pops it in, and sometimes it can be out of context. So what Edward's done here, and this paper is from 2000, April 2000, I think, or January 2000, and so we're talking over 2 decades now that this has been around, and I stumbled across this article when I was looking for something else, and immediately saved it in 2 places and printed it off and filed it.
Yeah.
But essentially, what he's done is have a look and traced all the way back through various different papers where this 2% false claim figure came from. And essentially, he says all roads lead back to Brown Miller, Suzanne Brown Miller. And he was looking at a paper, and who was saying there's a woman called Professor Torrey, who begins her, and I'm just going to read this bit out. It just says, begins her law review article by explaining that in preparation for her study, she, and then this is in quotations, became familiar with an enormous amount of empirical research in the area of rape myths and their power. Then Professor Torrey cites a main source and 2 backup sources for her 2% figure in an article that is in the Rape Victim Review. So what Edward did is essentially 3 references back. And then he cites how those references are used and how they are written in these articles. So, for example, the rape victim article says, in quotations again, statistics reveal that the percentage of unfounded accusations in the area of rape is about 2%, according to Lieutenant Julia Tucker, former commanding officer of the New York City Sex Crimes Analysis Unit. This is approximately the same percentage of unfounded charges which are found in other felonies. And I have to remember that sentence. And then he went and looked at the second source, which quotes this. The Rape Analysis Squad in New York City reported an estimated unfounding rate of 2%, no more than the rate for other crimes. Then he went and looked at the third source, which in quotations says, estimates indicate that only 2% of all reported rapes prove to be false, which is comparable to the rate of false reports for other crimes. So it's almost verbatim. It's maybe a little bit paraphrased, but essentially it's the same sentence over and over again. So then he says that actually, when he traces this back, he says, despite the plethora of pyramided citations, it turns out that there is one, and only one, underlying source. Feminist publicist Susan Brown Miller's interpretation of some data, now a quarter of a century old, and this is in 2000, remember, of unknown provenance from a single police department unit. There is no other published studies that this author could find. Of all the sources cited at the outset of this article, all trace back to Ms. Brown Miller. And when you dig into that, when you continue this particular section, it says in Susan Brown Miller's Susan Brown Miller set forth the following in her book. When New York City created a special rape analysis squad commanded by police women, the female police officers found that only 2% of all rape complainants were false, about the same false report rate that is usual for other kind of felonies. Sound familiar? Mm-hmm. When one looks at her source notes for the proposition, she states it to be New York City rape squad analysis found only 2% of complainants were false. A note, not a report. And then he goes on to say, Brown Miller, very meticulous and organised writer, very kindly on my request, located and sent me a copy of this Xerox speech. So it's just a copy of a speech. In relevant part, the judge's speech, because this was actually taken from the case notes that the judge had quoted. In the judge's speech, it reads, in fact, according to the commander of New York City's Rape Analysis Squad, only about 2% of all rapes and related sex charges are determined to be false, and this is about the same as the rate of false charges of other felonies. Sound familiar?
Yeah, so it's just a quote lifted directly out of that speech without vetting it at all.
Time and time and time again. And then he says, it goes, I'm just going to miss a bit of it, but he says, what was involved in the preparation of Judge Cook's speech? Their best recollection, and he'd asked the court for this, are that they did not rely upon any report, but cannot remember precisely how they did obtain the 2% figure. Of course, it remains possible that such a report was generated, but as of this date, no one is able to adduce it. Without the document, one cannot analyse the underlying data, the protocol used in evaluating it, or even whether it met minimum criteria of accuracy. A few weeks later, after the delivery of this speech, a New York Times reporter, Grace Lichstein, published a piece on that group in the New York Times magazine entitled Rape Squad. The article discussed the very brief tenure of Lieutenant Julie Tucker and how this squad, exclusively composed of police, not social scientists, was primarily a statistic gathering operation. Although all of this police squad's members were trained in judo, they are not, as far as can be ascertained, trained in statistical analysis. This is what she wrote in her article. Towards the end of her article, Miss Lichtenstein states that even under the newly reformed New York State rape statute, convictions were difficult to achieve, despite studies showing that the percentage of rape complainants later discovered to be unfounded was only 2%, the same as for all unfounded felonies. It's just completely repeated over and over and over.
So, folks, this is us going through the process of how a woozle is created. That name, by the way, is it's German. It's Liechtenstein. Yeah. But I've known some people. Well, that one's kind of difficult. German and Polish names can be difficult if you didn't grow up in an area that was heavily German and Polish populated. But I did, so sometimes I have an easier time.
Well, it's really interesting that this is the name is tautology, and it's that thing where you just keep repeating it and just keep repeating it and just keep repeating it, and then it becomes truth. Exactly. But here, it literally says it's taken from one, and the court's saying it, but they don't really know where they got it from. And then someone else is quoting a judge's speech. So this is based on nothing.
Yeah, it's literally just thin air. That somebody somewhere along the line saw something that led them to believe this was a valid statistic, but without anything that can be traced back to an evaluation of anything, any real statistics. You can't confirm it. It's completely and utterly it's thin air. It's a will-o-wisp.
But it's based on this one rape squad that was in New York.
Yeah.
That were, and again, with all the respect in the world, on police officers that are not trained on this type of research. But also, we can't find a data set. So we can't even evaluate the data set. But they've come out with this, well, only 2% of it is. Well, 2% of what?
Yeah.
Even if it is 2%, 2% of what?
Yeah, were there 10 allegations or were there 1,000 allegations? Because it makes a difference in how far you can extrapolate that into the rest of the population. Were there 10 in one neighborhood against people that were all the same demographic? Or were there, 1,000 with a variety of people affected? Were they all made by the same woman? Or were there... Because there was a case in the UK where there was one woman who was actually convicted of, 11 false allegations?
But the thing is, though, but you can't see a data set, so you can't see the percentage of people that withdrew their allegations. Whatever that reason is it because they're frightened? Is it because it's false? Is it because of evidential difficulties? Is it because of this?
Did they get the wrong guy?
Yeah. Was it, and that could be a false allegation. It could be a disruptive memory. It could be a myriad of things. But we can't say for fact what that is until we see a data set. But from what this is saying, that data set doesn't exist. So that just could be conjecture. It could be the Lieutenant Julie Tucker saying, well, I had a chat with a few people. I reckon it's about 2%. Or it could be based on something else. But I would not a gambler in any way. I would actually put money on the fact that if this was based on robust data, we would be able to find it.
Yep. Now, we're going to go in the other direction, and we're going to take a look at something else. And this goes back to the first time I heard about this study would have been, I want to say around 2013 when I first started writing for A Voice for Men, and I started looking into what's the truth about the rate of false allegations. Now, I'll preface this by saying it doesn't matter to me personally whether 1,000th of 1% of false allegations or of allegations are false, or 99% are false in terms of whether or not I think allegations should be vetted. One person wrongly convicted and thrown in jail is too many, in my opinion, and based on violations of their due process rights. That should never happen. And at the other end of it, when someone is convicted and they are put in jail, the public has the right to know. I have the right to know that my tax dollars are not being used to falsely imprison someone who has been wrongly accused, wrongly prosecuted, and wrongly convicted. And I also have the right to know that if I'm a crime victim and I accuse someone and it goes to court and they're convicted, they're not going to be able to come back and say, well, my conviction was false, I'm innocent, and you should believe me because I didn't get a fair trial, and place doubt on my allegations because of a tendency in the court system to do that. And under the current situation, we are right there. Anybody that's been convicted can come back and say, well, not all of the exculpatory evidence was allowed because there are certain types of exculpatory evidence that are excluded routinely from rape cases. So anybody that's in jail right now for committing rape could be an innocent person who was convicted because exculpatory evidence was excluded from their case. And that puts every accuser in doubt, including the ones whose allegations are 100% true and 100% provable. And that really destroys our ability as a society to trust our system, our court system, and to trust that in any instance when somebody has made an allegation like this and it looks like it's been vetted by the court, that they're not lying to us. Like every accuser is in doubt, in my opinion. Everyone. So the thing that I want to look at is the McDowell study, and I'm going to go through because there is a lot of feminist criticism of this study, and this came out really small, so I'm going to increase the size of it, see if it will make the text at least a little more readable on the YouTube video. And of course, it's just going to narrow it because, screw my ability to actually have this read on my screen. There we go. Let's see if I can get this set up so you can see it very well. There we go. So, there is a bunch of stuff that was said in this in regard to the McDowell study. But the one point that Radar made that was really solid that needs to be remembered in this is for this study, all right, a declaration of false charge was only made if the complainant admitted that no rape had occurred. She was the sole agent who could say that the rape charge was false. The police department would not declare a rape charge as false when the complainant, for whatever reason, failed to pursue the charge or failed to cooperate on the case, regardless of how much doubt the police may have regarding the validity of the charge. So these cases that were counted in the McDowell study were declared false only because the complainant admitted they were false. And that's like really vital to know. So the McDowell study actually went through, this is Dr. Charles P. McDowell of the U.S. Air Force Special Investigations, led a team that investigated 556 rape allegations. The initial research categorized 220 of those allegations as true, 80 as false, and 256 as inconclusive. So there were actually more inconclusive allegations than allegations that were categorized as true. When they announced their initial results, they'd categorized 46% of their data as inconclusive. And so they were very cautious there. And the statistic that they came out with, if I remember right, was like 61%, But this was cited by there we go. And this I thought I had the article up here, but I guess I just have the graphic from the article. Let me really quick get that as well. And I want to say, okay, so I don't have it automatically bookmarked like I thought I did on this computer. I have too many computers, guys. But John Davis wrote for the National Coalition for Men. He wrote an article titled "How Many Allegations of Rape Are False." Let me see if I... Let me see if I can get this up here. There we go. How many rape allegations are false? And I'm going to put the article in our text so you guys can see it. Here we go. And the thing about this, one of the things that he pointed out, feminists like to pass around a statistic and a graphic that shows the allegations of rape as a bunch of men, right? That little male figures, and then they have a smaller set of them. The big set is rapist, the smaller set is face trial, and then the tiniest set is jailed. And they leave out that a percentage of rapists are female, and there are various there's a variety of research that shows a variety of statistics. John went with 50%. Some people say about 40%, and then there's some information that indicates that it might actually be higher, and they're simply people are not recognizing sexual aggression when a woman engages in it as still being an act of aggression, which is normal. People don't recognize physical aggression necessarily as an act of aggression when a woman does it either, especially in a situation where they feel like the man is in the wrong. You know, if he said something rude and she slaps him, historically there's this treatment of that as the correct response, and it's not considered aggressive, but it is.
You see it in films all the time.
Oh yes,
it's completely normalized. There's and it's even classed as humor,
right?
When a woman smacks a man, it's unbelievably common, and you see it all over the place. That a guy might be late, or something really trivial's happened, and he gets a right wallop around his face.
Yeah,
and you think, why are people laughing at this? Why is this actually inserted as a comedy moment?
Right? This isn't funny. It's not funny to you know. And yes, a woman's anger can be funny if she doesn't do anything harmful. If she just stands there and sputters over something that she really shouldn't legitimately be angry about. And the same is true, you know, with a guy. And that is portrayed in movies all the time. You know, a guy gets angry about something and then stands there and sputters, but the difference is sputtering helplessly, you know, how you can't, how dare you, what the heck, you know, and that kind, like, that's funny.
Yeah.
But hitting somebody isn't funny. And I suppose you can say, well, it would be different if, you know, both sides were able to do that, but we know that historically it's just recognized that men being bigger and stronger, when they hit somebody, you have to take it seriously. Unfortunately, there is a lot of good reasons to take it seriously when a woman hits somebody, and people don't take it as seriously as they should. But yeah, this statistic, the way that John put this was, I like the way he designed this, because it shows that both sexes can be accused. Both sexes can be rapists, and that among the accused, there's a large body of innocent accused, and there's a large body among those that face trial that are innocent, and those that are jailed that are innocent. And although it's not the greatest percentage of all accused, it's enough to be very concerned about this. Again,
I think again the thing that I find most disgusting about this is by not acknowledging that this happens, it actually harms people that have been raped, because it makes it dilutes the seriousness of, and I don't see a difference between. I know they like to say the word rape because it is seen societally as an abhorrent crime. It's not normalized in any way. Most people class rape, the vast majority of people class rape as abhorrent. But then they kind of section it off and say, no, only a woman can be raped because, according to COS, you have to have a penis inserted in some way. And anything that happens to a man can be classed as serious sexual assault, but it dilutes the impact. Rape and serious sexual assault have completely different impacts on how we see these acts. And for me, rape is rape. I don't care if the victim is male or female, or the perpetrator is male or female, or any of those combinations of the above. But not acknowledging false allegations needs to be based on evidence to make sure that these things are legitimate. And crikey, there's probably someone sticking pins in effigies of me as I say that. But unless we actually tackle this problem, it's going to make it more difficult for people that have actually gone through this abhorrent crime.
Mm-hmm. It is, and there's a number of ways it makes it more difficult. Among other things, like the people around you don't take it seriously if it is understood that you only have to make an allegation and it's never going to be vetted, right? Everybody is like, well, we have to go through the motions of this, but nobody has to believe it because it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. The guy is just toast, right? And at the same time, when you go into a court case, there is still, like the 7 years in hell case, the guy was falsely accused of rape in that case as well. And what happened to him, and this is one of the reasons why I point out that false accusers are abusers, and the targets of their allegations are victims, right? This is an act of abuse against another person. He was arrested, dragged into the police office for, they called it bringing him in for questioning, so they didn't do everything they do during an arrest, and they didn't have to to provide him the same rights. But he wasn't allowed to just not go. So that's basically putting you under arrest, right? And this detective grilled him, about this, and he was able to prove that at the time and date that he was accused of breaking into this woman's house and raping her, he was at another location on camera. And they got film they got footage from the location, and so that should have ended the investigation. She clearly lied. But what happened was the detective went back and asked her about that. Are you sure you had the time and date correct? And she, oh no, I had the wrong day. You don't remember what day you were raped? I thought this was the worst thing that can happen. A fate worse than death for a woman. And you don't remember what day it happened? And so this detective... Didn't we see some of that? I don't know if that was the right day or the right photograph or everything else in the case that's just gone. I particularly remember there was two photographs of wine and a wine bottle on the floor that in cross-examination Camille was asking Amber, say that in your testimony you've said that that's on that date and this other one is on another date,
but is this not the same photograph?
Yeah, that may have happened. I didn't get to watch like every minute of the case, and I wouldn't be surprised. This is exactly the kind of thing that does happen in these cases, you know, when there is a false allegation. And what happened with 7 Years in Hell guy is, you know, the detective took the accuser seriously even after she changed the date. So she dragged him back in. She had the cops go get him and drag him back in. He comes back, and she gives him the changes of story and demands he account for his whereabouts. Well, by the time this allegation had been made, all of us around him were making ourselves available to document his whereabouts. And he was taking measures to be able to prove where he was and what he was doing at any given time of day. So he had proof that, again, he was somewhere else doing something else. And it was physical proof. And then he also had witnesses. And so she goes back to the accuser. And the accuser changed her story again, another date and another time. And it was the third time that the detective demanded he account for his whereabouts that his attorney finally said, "This is bordering on harassment. If you don't stop changing the story and demanding he account for different days, we are going to file a harassment lawsuit accusing you of shopping for a day he just can't account for." And,
yes.
you know, and so that ended the case. The supervisor of the detective had to tell the detective, "This case is done. You can drop this." But it took that amount of legal action. You know, like there was no rape. There was no, the guy did not lay a finger on this woman. In fact, he did everything he possibly could to avoid her because she was horrible. This is somebody that if you knew her, you would take active measures to not be wherever she was going to be because she's just that repulsive of a person to be around. Like, I've been around her a few times, and it's just one of those people that you just don't want to be anywhere near this person. And, you know, she wasn't always like that, but that's what she became. And, you know, and toward him in particular, she was horrible. And so there was no abuse, there was no contention, there was no interaction, there was nothing. And yet he was asked to prove a negative every single time. He was harangued with multiple changes of story. At one point, he was accused of the heinous crime, the absolutely dastardly deed of a drive-by greeting that never happened.
I remember you told me that. He
waved menacingly. Yes. Like the guy that drove by the bar she couldn't have been at because she told a judge she was going to be out of state for 2 weeks and waved menacingly. Dun, dun, dun. But yeah, so...
Legal and administrative abuse has been written about. I think it was Hines and Douglas. I can't remember if it was 2007 or 2011. Wrote about legal and administrative abuse, and that's both within and post separation. So within the relationship and post separation, and we found that in our surveys that within the relationship. False allegations, both of any kind of abuse and sexual allegations, were used as coercive control. And then post-separation, they were used often to contact with children. So an allegation, or they would break a court order and blame it on the fact that these allegations, that they would bring out these allegations of, again, whether it was sexual or abusive.
Right.
It was actually used as, it was weaponized, absolutely weaponized. And again, we've got literature that shows this time and time again. So Going back to the Johnny and Amber case, we saw this repeatedly, where allegations were made, and then law enforcement, security, cameras, all sorts of things, completely dissipated it. It just made it completely myth.
Yeah.
And then even her own testimony, when she was talking about him assaulting her with the bottle, sexually assaulting her with the bottle, I just felt for women at that point, because it was coming from Amber, the women that have experienced this, and there it is in plain sight being made a mockery of.
Yeah, so I will just say, if someone were to assault you with a bottle, you would know if it was the broken bottle or not. And I can
imagine if you're assaulted with a broken bottle, there's going to be a fair amount of hemorrhaging going on.
Slashing, yes. This is the thing. I was assaulted with an object and told it was a gun. And it took me a while to realize they had lied to me. At the time that I was assaulted, I was terrified. I was 100% certain that it was going to go off and go up through my body, and I was going to die. And it was going to hurt really bad. And but then I was thinking about it because, afterwards, because it had one of those little thingies on it, the sight at the front of the gun where and it's like I have used tampons, I have used vibrators. Like, you can tell if there is some shape beyond a smooth barrel going up there, like if and that would have been noticeable. And of course, later on, that's to realize that was a relief, and at the same time incredibly angering, because like clearly that was just intended to intimidate, right? But I would know if it was if somebody used a bottle on me like that. I would know if there were jagged edges of broken glass. Like, that is so reminiscent of the story from the Rolling Stone with the rape allegation, where the gal said that they smashed a glass table and then raped her on top of the broken glass. Like, if you had that happen to you, you would just be sliced to ribbons. Your skin of your back would just be sliced to ribbons. And, of course, the rapists would be damaged as well, because their legs would be on it, and their testicles would hit it. To be horribly graphic here. There's just no way something like that would happen without people knowing, and without there being blood everywhere, and without there being severe injuries that were easy to document and easy to find. And none of that evidence was present. And like that story that Amber Heard told, hearing about that was incredibly angering, just because, having really gone through something that was, put me in fear for my life.
Yeah.
And that actually, it's, I don't know how to explain this other than to say, gosh, I like, this is tough. It makes me feel not robbed exactly, but diminished or belittled.
Yes.
By that, like, a joke has been made out of my experience, because here she is weaponizing that kind of experience and using it to attack somebody that did nothing to her, and demanding that it be treated as something that, well, you can just say this stuff and people should believe it. And it's...
Yeah, I cannot agree with you more. I think televising this essential. You won't be surprised that I'm going against the narrative of those saying it should never have been televised. I can't be thankful enough that it's been televised. But I imagine people like yourself and those that are vulnerable felt absolutely traumatized by that.
You're having some sound problems. I'm like, it wasn't so prevalent in the beginning, but now it seems like every few words you like drop out completely.
Might be my internet in the middle of the mountain range,
Okay,
but
that might be it. That might be it.
I think that again, we're seeing this narrative that's coming out saying this case is detrimental to female victims. I actually think the evidence that was given, and they need to take account for this, that when something is used like that, when it is weaponized and is out there in a public, that this is an experience that many, many women have gone through, and seemingly she's taking that and weaponizing it to cause more harm against someone else. I think it's a betrayal.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that can have such serious traumatic effects on people that have actually experienced that. But still touted as perfect victim, or however they're framing it today. It'll change tomorrow. But this is, and by saying that, oh, she is still the victim, even though we all saw the evidence, there was a jury in there that found against her, and they're now traumatizing the re-traumatization. It's almost as if they can't stop just hitting the very people they are claiming to help. They just keep doing it.
Yep. And it's one of those things that they'll never stop as long as they're not held accountable. There's certain types of like violations, certain types of aggressive acts or sneaky acts, right, that people only engage in if they don't have a sense of ethics. Like, they don't care about the effects on other people. They're not doing it because they're mistaken. They're doing it because they don't care who they hurt, but they want to get something out of it, and they feel they can get away with it. And the only way to put a stop to those types of behaviors, and lying about this stuff to attack somebody, lying about this stuff is one of those behaviors, right? That you don't do it because you're mistaken, right? Amber Heard didn't do it because she was trying to do something good and it was just useful for her. She did it because she could get away with it. She thought she could get away with it. She did it because it would hurt him, and she did it because it would get her attention. Right? That's like, these are not innocent mistakes ever.
No, but there's, and this is where I always have a quandary, because I get so frustrated that my head just won't compute that there's now the media and the press and everyone else is, well, not everyone else, a particular part of the media is still touting that this is down to misogyny and patriarchal whatever and all the rest of it, and she's a victim and it's going to affect women like this.
Yeah.
I've asked that question on previous occasions, nothing like this, but when I've been frustrated, I've asked this question of people that are far more expert in my field than I am. Said, how can people behave like this? And some people actually believe it. They utterly believe that what they're saying is correct.
You know, there was that one news story about the college co-ed who made an allegation, and she was shown video to prove that it never happened, and she was like, she acted shocked Like, that was totally not how she remembered it. She convinced herself that it was true and created a false memory based on it.
You know, and things like that do happen, but there are a couple, like I said at the beginning, there are a couple of prominent feminists that are really pushing hard on this narrative, and they were all the way through the case. They've written for The Guardian over here and for various articles in America, and these are the experts that they're touting about, saying experts are saying this is going to, you know, knock back the Me Too movement and all the harm women and all that kind of stuff, and they can't see the harm that they're causing themselves. But I find myself wondering, it's just mercenary money or whatever or attention you're trying to get, or do you actually have lenses so thick filters out all the evidence that the rest of us can see?
And I think sometimes there's a combination of both. Like, it may start out with some individuals as a mercenary thing, but I have seen other people convince themselves of absolute bald-faced lies in other circumstances. So it doesn't surprise me that it can happen in this one as well. Now, I want to finish up on the bit about the research showing a variety of rates of false allegations really quick. And again, John cited a bunch of different studies, and you can see the chart that I have up here showed 60% of allegations being just flat out false, 8% had a recanting victim, meaning that I'm assuming that means that the person was a victim but recanted anyway. 15% were acquittals. So there were definitely allegations that were proved false, even though they weren't deemed false by law enforcement. And then 17% were convicted, and he's actually citing a combination of resources for this. So I'm just going to pull this up where you can see it. And this is the image I'm looking at here for our chat. Dang it. I just, screwed up my Discord. I don't work well with a touchpad. There we go. But, and I actually pulled the graphic from a different blog because it's a larger image and it shows better. But he's got a whole set of sources here. And so what we're probably looking at in this chart here is averages. But it does definitely give you an idea of the kind of the range there. And then there was a thesis that I actually ran across a while back. And this actually, let's see if I've got, no, that's the wrong thing. There we go. So this thesis, this was written, let me go back to the top of the page here. I'm on 42 there. This is Huddersfield University, Benjamin Bachman, and this was used. This is offered as a template. I guess it was so well done that it's offered as a template now, but it's actually available in a few places. And let me go back to the page here, and I will. I think that was 42. Let's see, and I'll put that in our chat. And I'm on page 42 of this, just looking at this chart. Just want to point out what this chart shows is a range of numbers going from as low as 1.5% in one old study to as high as 89% in another old study. Now, I'm not going to make arguments as to whether any particular studies from this set are accurate, but I am going to point out that these studies did use different methods, methodologies, and so on, different standards and different sample sizes. You can see some of them were as small as, like the smallest one, the 89% is only 18 sample size, very tiny. And then, some of them have larger sample sizes. And, like the 2005 Kelly study was 2,643. And then you had, as we pointed out, the McDowell study was a larger number as well. And it demonstrates that even when feminists tell you 8%, you have to look into how they got that number. You can't just take that number at face value, because changing how you're looking and who you're looking at and what you're looking at, how many you're looking at, and so on, definitely changes the number. And I personally wouldn't go around saying, well, 89% of allegations are false, because I haven't examined that study, and it is tiny, and it's not something that you could necessarily say is applicable to the general population. But it does demonstrate that in certain circumstances you can look at a body of evidence, a set of allegations, and find that many false allegations, and that creates a question, and a criticism, in my opinion, that if we can look at this and say false allegations can be that high of a rate in a set, false allegations can be that high of a rate in an environment, that makes it very important to vet them. What would cause something like that to happen? Right? Could it be?
Yeah,
could it be a situation like with the Koss narrative, where she called a lot of situations rape when the respondents for her survey didn't think they were?
Yeah.
Or could it be a situation where you go into your orientation at your university, and all of a sudden you are getting told, if you've had a beer and then you have sex with somebody, you have been raped?
Yeah, it's funny that they never ask if the other person's had a beer.
Yeah. That's another question. And legal standards for guilt, different crimes require different levels of a concept called mens rea, which I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but it's essentially your intentions, right? You could be convicted of manslaughter even if you didn't intend to kill the person that you killed. But you can only be convicted of murder, at least in the United States, you can only be convicted of murder if you intentionally killed someone.
Yeah.
Right? So that makes a big difference. And it should be a difference in terms of sexual assault as well. You shouldn't be convicted of rape if you didn't have the capacity to intentionally contravene someone's ability to refuse. Or if it can be demonstrated that the person had the capacity to determine, to choose to refuse, and chose not to refuse, and didn't communicate to you any aversion, and you had no opportunity to evaluate, right, whether you were contravening a refusal. Like, those are things that should affect a case, but they don't necessarily, especially in feminist ideology. Like, they don't care. The guy doesn't have to have any intention. He just has to be just slightly wrong by their standards in going forward, and suddenly it's rape. So you can have girls that get convinced that they can participate enthusiastically in a sex act and still be victims of rape afterwards, and they're more likely to make a false allegation under that circumstance.
Absolutely terrifying for everyone involved, but it does seem to set up the notion that women are the gatekeepers of sex, and it's all about a man having to gain consent from a woman. And it's just so lopsided. It is so in one direction that I'm just so fearful for men in general, but young men in particular these days.
Yep.
It absolutely terrifies me that, and I've used Coss's scale. I'll tell you exactly when I used it and exactly the chat I had with my supervisor at the time. It was in my master's dissertation,
Mm-hmm.
and I was looking at female victims of sexual assault. My supervisor of my master's is my second supervisor in my PhD, and so I came across the cost thing. Didn't really know all the background to it and stuff, but it seemed to be in a lot of places, so I thought I'd use it. And when I did my survey, I was looking at facial emotion recognition, vulnerability, and resilience as protective factors in female victims of sexual assault. And I stated in there that this could be replicated over male victims as well. But for time constraints and various other things, I'd focused on the abundance of literature on female victims. But I used Coss's scale, an abridged version of it, and I found that there was questions in it that were asked that were indicators that someone had been raped. And then at the end of that question, it asks, have you ever been raped? And there was a proportion of people that had answered all the indicators that you could assume would lead to rape.
Yeah.
But then when it came to that final question, they said no. And because I was relatively new to this, I went to my supervisor saying, this is terrible. We've got these people that have clearly been raped and they don't think they've been raped. Should we tell them that they've been raped? And my supervisor is one of the best lessons I learned about data and how we interpret it and how you shouldn't interpret it and be aware of your own bias and all this stuff. Because she said to me, what if it wasn't? What if it was just
Yeah. Well, and she's right.
What if it was just that particular act? So, to be very graphic, and forgive me if it's too graphic, but say someone was having sex, enthusiastic consenting sex, and it all got a bit heated, and it turned into something that was like anal sex that they hadn't explicitly consented to, and they hadn't actually enjoyed it, and they felt a little bit, oh, right, well, I wasn't very happy about that. That's a question in that scale. That happened to me. Someone inserted a penis into my anus without consent. And when that question is framed like that, you think, oh my God, that's terrible. Someone's had that happen to them without consent. And then the final question says no. But actually, they consented to sex in general with that person. And they don't feel like they've been raped in that sense of the word. They felt that maybe they should have asked that question before it got to that point.
Yeah. Well, and then there's other possibilities, like with the alcohol facilitated rape, right? Because the way the question is worded is not, it's as vague as they can get without being, overly vague. So you, instead of saying, has anybody ever had sex with you against your will, and then circumstance, it's, have you ever had sex when you didn't want to, and then circumstance. And the alcohol facilitated rape was, have you ever had sex when you didn't want to because a man gave you alcohol? Well, I've known, even when I was in high school, female alcoholics. And a person who said, I'll give you a blowjob for a beer, and was given a beer and gave the blowjob, had sex when they didn't want to because a man gave them alcohol. right?
Right.
They weren't
Yeah.
planning. They weren't planning on enjoying the sex. It was transactional. So if somebody prostituted themselves for a beer, and they would be deemed a rape victim, and that was an encounter that she initiated, right? And then similarly, I've been out with gals that, I was a designated driver a lot when I was younger because I went from not drinking to not drinking again. I only drank for like maybe 20 years in my life, and then not very much. But I've been out with people that would get just blitzed, right? And I've known gals that would have a couple of beers and then grab some guy and go off and screw him. And this was her initiating it. She was aware of what she was doing. She was drunk. She was tipsy, or even a little bit not stumbling drunk, but slurring drunk, right? And sometimes, she'd say, "I'm not going to do that tonight. Tonight I'm just going to go dancing." But then after a few drinks, she's a little more relaxed and she feels a little more bold and a little more devil may care, and makes the decision to, go out and get fucked. And that's another one where, well, she hadn't been planning on it, but, I bought her a couple of drinks. She decided she liked him, and so she went off and screwed him. And this is something that, you can't tell somebody she can't do that. You can't, stop her. The guy can say no. That there is that. But the truth is, people have the right to make those decisions for themselves. And a woman can answer those questions. I had sex when I didn't want to, meaning I had sex when I hadn't planned to. I had told myself I wasn't going to do this, and then I changed my mind when I was drinking. But that doesn't make the guy a rapist. The guy didn't ply her with alcohol to contravene her refusal, right? They hit it off together, and it's pretty normal in our culture for the guy to buy the beers. It doesn't make him a rapist because he's doing the normal thing. It's very different than running across somebody who's incapacitated because they're drunk, or who clearly doesn't know where they are and what they're doing, right? Who can't answer your questions, who can't walk on her own, or his own. Very different.
Absolutely, but there's also, again, I'm not talking about. It's really difficult to say it without saying genuine or true or anything else. But those people that have actually experienced the kind of stuff we're talking about. The other side of this coin is sex. That I don't know if you have this saying in America. We have a thing called beer goggles.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you go to bed with a god and you wake up with Quasimodo, yeah?
Yeah. Well, that's what the movie, the title phrase from the movie Coyote Ugly was about. Well, you got your beer goggles on the night before, and you wake up the next morning with somebody who, it's the situation's so bad that you want to do like a coyote does when its paw is caught in a trap and chew your own arm off to get out from under him and get away. I've never had that happen because I didn't used to be able to get drunk. I went from a metabolism that prevented me from being able to get drunk to a metabolism that made alcohol hit me like a ton of bricks in small amounts, and I discovered I don't like being drunk. So I fortunately, and also I just don't think I would do that if I was out in a situation where I was going to be around a bunch of strangers. It would be too scary. But I know people that's happened to.
It's something that common, shall we say, that you've done that. I mean, we used to call it the walk of shame, where you would meet someone on a Sunday morning, clearly wearing the clothes they were out in last night, a little bit dishevelled, really craving some kind of protein-based to sort them out while they were getting home. All that kind of... We've seen it. It's not uncommon that happens. But just because you wake up and think, shit, the hell do I get out of here? I don't know where I am, what I'm with, who that is, where's my shoes, that kind of stuff. Just because that happens, it's been framed now that, well, you couldn't have given consent because you were drunk and blah, blah, blah. So you've been raped.
So,
and again, that takes me back to my supervisor when I was on my high horse saying, should we intervene as psychologists and tell these people that this has happened? And they were like, and she actually said, who are you to tell someone as a victim if they're okay?
Yeah.
That's not how they've seen it. Who are you? You're a psychologist. You're not a god, you know.
Yep.
And it really grounded me. It was one of the best lessons I've ever learned. And I think it's this, we're infantilizing people. Where,
definitely.
You know, you've had sex with someone that obviously you were attracted to in that hazy moment. And again, they never say, was the person you were with, were they drinking? Were they also drunk? It's always about, did you give this consent? Will you ask for consent? And I think we're infantilizing. Well, I was going to say we're in danger of, but this narrative infantilizes women.
Yeah.
It removes agency, and it makes them live in fear.
Yep.
When actually, at that point in time, they weren't that drunk that you were talking about that they couldn't walk. Maybe they were a bit too relaxed. Maybe they weren't in the right, you know, maybe they were making decisions that weren't actually logical.
Right.
That's what happens in those situations. Then extrapolate that out to something that could make someone feel bad about themselves for the rest of their lives.
Well, yeah, because
it's a really shitty thing to do.
The same people that tell women under that circumstance, oh yes, no, you have definitely been raped. You're a rape victim, right? Also tell them that rape victims face a profoundly emotionally damaging and socially damaging stigma, right? And now, even within the movement that society would most expect to judge people for saying, judge women in particular for saying, I am a rape victim, right? I've never been judged for that. I've never had somebody look down on me for that. Everybody that has heard that from me has been compassionate and caring. The worst experience I have with it now with people is they feel bad about it. And I'm like, no, you understand, that was over 20 years ago. Yes, it fucking sucked. It was awful, okay? But it was awful then. And I don't like thinking about it now, but I'm not traumatized in the moment right now about something that happened that long ago, right?
And that what you've just said there was the crux of, and anyone can go and find this, and if anyone wants to read it, just let me know, and it's out there, my master's dissertation, and the crux of my research now. The paper was talking about how they give, in this instance, female victims this almost a life sentence of you will be traumatized forever.
Right.
When actually, that's not reality. The reality is that we all live traumatic events. You know, life is not without trauma.
Right.
But resilience, you can adapt to things. I'm not using that phrase of get over it. You adapt to things. You can use that to adapt in different ways. It might take you down into something like me. My first marriage was immensely abusive. Didn't recognize a lot of it at the time, but I remember feeling extremely bad and traumatized, and consequently got diagnosed with PTSD. But I don't then use that to think I'm traumatized for the rest of my life. There are certain triggers that I've got, but I recognize them. But I used it to go into research. I used it to do, and that, again, that's not uncommon. People going in to help other people or doing something different with their lives or something else. It's not uncommon.
Right.
It's probably far more common than someone that is traumatized for the rest of their lives. But we pump out this narrative. Oh, women will be traumatized for the rest of their lives. It is something that will affect you for the rest of your lives. It is. What are we doing to these people?
It's very damaging.
Living trauma.
And that's really the next thing I wanted to get into. The next standard, the next myth is that false allegations are harmless, so the false accuser hasn't done anything wrong. And this is a big one, right? So we've just looked at how feminism and its false allegations traumatizes women who end up convinced that they have been raped or end up convinced that they have been abused because feminist standards for what constitutes rape or abuse are not the same as maybe the legal standard and even the social standards and people's internal standards, right? So they'll tell you have to take on this victimhood. And then at the same time, they tell you the victimhood is bigger than it really is, longer than it really is, and more damaging and traumatic than it really is. And it's not that trauma isn't there. It's not that there's no damage. It's not that there isn't any length of time or, that there are not things that are long-lasting. It's that you do have the right and the capacity to adapt and change and not be as immediately traumatized, not be in constant pain over it. You know, like I know that my attackers are not sitting outside my house waiting, or my apartment waiting to hurt me again. I will never see those guys again. I'm not even anywhere near where, well, I know one of them is no longer with us anyway, so but that's another story I'm not going to tell.
But you imagine if that was to you, and for whatever reason, usually vulnerability, that's how your identity was built around that. I am a rape victim. I am a victim of rape. I am traumatized. I am everything else. Is that not re-traumatizing?
Oh yeah, that would be
the very act.
If I had to build my identity around that, I would not be able to be the person that I am. It would totally rob me of my real identity.
Imagine if you're then put into a legal system where you have to stand up and recant this this experience that you've now been told is let's assume that in this hypothetical instance it was rape, and then you have to recant that in a public forum where you've then got to go through that, and court is traumatizing. No one likes it, but in those situations and with vulnerability, I imagine it would be extremely traumatizing. So you're going through this trauma after trauma after trauma, and it's compounding and compounding. So it's no wonder these people are coming out the other end thinking, I'm going to be traumatized for life, because it's just been compounded into them. And I question, how is that empowerment?
Well, that's just it. It's not. And
if this is the goal of feminism, to empower women, please, someone just explain to me how that is empowerment.
Yep, that's just it. It's not. So the first thing that we can, get out of the way, at least, is that the false allegations of the feminist movement actually are traumatic to both actual victims whose experiences are made worse than they have to be, and women who end up being false accusers because they have followed feminist standards and adopted a victim experience that they didn't have to have because they were not victims. But obviously the primary victim of a false allegation is the target.
Yes.
And this is something that, again, I haven't had the experience of being falsely accused of rape, and I've never been accused of rape, so I haven't had that, or being the abuser in a relationship. I've never been accused of either of those things, but I have been falsely accused of more minor things, and it is a very traumatic experience to just be falsely accused of being an equal participant in a fight that was actually an assault. And
yes, I remember this.
Yeah, in 2019, another woman attacked me in an environment where fighting back could have escalated it in a way that could have caused a vulnerable person to get hurt. And I didn't, and I got injured. I had a concussion. I have permanent damage to my right eye from that experience. And it's that one still bothers me to talk about, because I'm to the point now where thinking about it isn't scary anymore. And the scary part of that was, what if I can't keep this from spilling over to, the vulnerable person I'm protecting. But I'm angry. I can't talk about this without getting angry, right? And it was over something so minor. I can't even tell you guys what it was over, because it would violate somebody's privacy. But it was over something so minor that if you knew, you would just sputter in shock from it. And I'm not a good victim. I'm not good at being scared and looking upset and crying over it and everything. I have been through violent traumas and medical emergency traumas enough times that my response to a traumatic situation is triage. I triage the situation pretty quickly. And a good example of this is I was working at a pharmacy. I was the shift supervisor. I had just closed the store with my cashier, and we had just walked out of the building. I had just locked it, and I turned around to walk toward my vehicle. And as I turned toward my vehicle, I was facing the intersection. A car accident happened where somebody turned left in front of another vehicle and was struck by the oncoming vehicle so hard that their vehicle went flying through the intersection, flipped over in the air, and landed on its side, and then rolled back onto the tires. And as I'm watching this happen, it didn't consciously occur to me what I was doing, and I didn't realize until I was halfway across the street toward the vehicle as it was landing, with my phone out, starting to talk to the 911 operator, that I had run toward the accident while calling 911.
Wow.
And I got over there and opened the car door and started talking to the person inside the car to ascertain their condition before I went, what the hell am I doing? I'm not an EMT. Right? But it was like instant. I had to go help. I had to go do something. And that's how I react. The situation with the assault, I instantly realized this person was out of control. She was enraged, like barbarian rage for D&D players. Like, this was something where this was like berserker rage. I don't think she was even in control of her own faculties. And so afterwards, when the officer came to talk to me, I wasn't shaking and crying. I was having difficulty communicating what happened, but I wasn't shaking and crying. I didn't have a lot of bruises. I managed to... I don't bruise that easily to begin with. And I managed to, keep from getting too beaten. At one point, I finally just said to her, I'm going to call the cops. And she ran. She was afraid of that. And so when I talked to the officer, He started looking at me like, well, why aren't you upset about this? Why aren't you crying? Why aren't you shaking? Why aren't you terrified? Because what I described happening was something that should have been scary. Well, then the girl had left her purse in at the scene, and she came back for it while the officer was there. I'm like 4 or 5 inches taller than her. She was 20 years younger than me and physically stronger than me, but I probably had a good 60 pounds on her. And instantly, the officer looked at her and looked at me, and she got teary-eyed, and she had a doe-eyed, cute little 20-year-old face, and he decided that I couldn't have been telling the truth about what happened. And,
Wow.
He didn't see, you can't see a concussion necessarily if there's not blood. What got hit was the back of my head, completely covered by hair. I don't experience head pain normally because I had encephalitis when I was 12, and the pain from that was so extreme that it overshadows all other head pain I've ever, like even migraines by comparison. So I didn't talk about head pain, and I didn't realize I had a problem until 4 or 5 hours later. I went to the ER a second time because I had some symptoms that I had paperwork that said if this happens, come back, and that's when I got the diagnosis of the concussion, right? So the officer cited us both for disorderly conduct. Now, that's been expunged since then because I was able to go to court, fight it. I proved, I got the charges, my charges dropped by getting her charges dropped, but then I went to have it expunged because there was plenty of evidence against her and no evidence against me, because I didn't attack her. And the whole time, I seriously felt like, I just felt dirty. I don't know how else to explain it. I felt like I have never been criminally charged up until this point for anything, because I just don't get myself involved in things that would lead to that. I have ethical concerns about things like stealing and hurting people, and so I avoid those things. But it really made me feel like a criminal, even though I knew I hadn't attacked that person. I knew I hadn't done anything. I still felt like a criminal, and I still felt embarrassed. Like, what if people see this and think that of me? And that was just for a misdemeanor charge where I was being accused of fighting back when I was attacked, when I didn't fight back. Like, that was it, right? And I cannot imagine. That's so tiny. And being accused of something that violates a social taboo, because there are a lot of people that be like, you have the right to self-defense. Screw that guy if he charged you for fighting back. Maybe what if you did fight back, right? But people won't say that if you're accused of rape. People won't say that to a man accused of beating his wife. People won't say that to a teenage boy accused of hitting his girlfriend even once. The other boys in his gym class are going to routinely bump into him just a little too hard, step on his feet, beat him with the basketball by accident, because he's a beater of girls. Like, that right there is harm.
Yeah, and it's something that, like I said at the beginning of this, that into that father of that young man that took his life.
Mm-hmm.
It is so detrimental on that level, and it has long-lasting effects on his entire family. But then, accusation, particularly made at men, and particularly made when even gone through some kind of judicial system and it's been proven to be false, there's still people that have that phrase in their head that is, there's no smoke without fire.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can't rub that stain off you, even if you've been through a legal system.
Exactly. Like, the minute that you get accused of something reprehensible, your reputation takes a hit. The people around you look at you and have to ask, could you have done this? And
I think that's what we saw in this latest case. I predict Johnny Depp are off.
You predict that Johnny Depp what?
Won't make Amber pay those damages. I think he'll let her off. Because I think what he wanted more than anything else, and the reason why he asked it to be televised, is because he needed to tell his story.
Yeah.
Because he needed his reputation back.
Yeah, he did. He needed to clear his name. And the really bad thing for him is this will clear his name with rational people, most rational people anyway, and this will clear his name with people who cared about him. This will clear his name with his fans. But there will always be a segment of the population with whom this will not clear his name. He could be found, like, you could see video, you could have video out there proving, like, video of Amber Heard planning the whole thing out. I'm gonna lie about Johnny Depp. And you could have video of her doing all kinds of abusive things to him and telling him, I'm gonna do this to you. And there would still be people who would say, well, he must have done something, right?
Well, that is the fourth myth here.
Yep,
You're
exactly.
never truly innocent.
Exactly.
Well, what did you do to make her do that? What did you do that she had to do that? She's the imperfect victim. She only did that because she'd been victimized. It's absolutely gaslighting.
Right.
It is gaslighting to the nth degree, to be able to take a piece of evidence. And we almost had that, because Amber Heard actually said, I was hitting you, I did this, yes, I do start physical fights, go on then, you go and do that. Johnny Depp, you tell the world that you too are a victim of domestic abuse, a man. She said it all.
Yeah.
And then she sat in court and said, yes, that was me saying that.
Yeah.
And then she went through all her gaslighting stuff.
And there were still people that believed her.
There.
And there were still people that believed her. There were defenders. She had defenders online. And they were not all bots.
And some of them are really influential.
Yeah. And some of them are so pervasive.
Can you imagine if it hadn't have been televised, if we hadn't have all witnessed that?
Yep.
And they say that, the additional people that would have believed that because of this narrative that is out there.
Yep.
But what, for me, the great hope is, and I don't want anyone to go around abusing anybody else or whatever, but I think the biggest tool we have in our armory now is ridicule.
Yeah.
And when these people, don't go down that line, don't arm them with anything, and don't lower yourself to that level, but point at them and laugh. And point out the fact that they're going against every bit of evidential saw there. If they're saying, oh, she's still a victim of all that, it's up to negate it.
Yeah.
Show them for what they are.
Yep.
Never abuse these people. Don't lower yourself to that level. But pointing and laughing at them, evidence. if that's what they're going to do, the best thing to do is dismiss them. Make them untouchable to people that have and have belief in evidence. Make them so much of a clown that people are just like, oh, I don't want to be a part of that.
You have to in order to take away their power, because this is the thing, right? What is a guy looking? What road is a guy looking down when she says to him, "I'll say you hit me if you don't do what I want. If you don't obey me, I'll say you hit me." He's looking at the potential for at least temporarily being imprisoned, at least being arrested and questioned and thrown in jail for hours until he gets processed. Even if he's acquitted later on, he is going to spend at least that amount of time in a cell. And that happened with the guy in the 7 years in hell case 5 times with false allegations. He was thrown in a cell and left in that cell while he was being processed with, you if you've listened to the Alice's Restaurant sketch from Arlo Guthrie, he's in there thinking about the people he's in jail with, and some of these people really are criminals, and he's like, I'm in there with mother rapers, father stabbers, father rapers, and he's just like, you can hear the thought process, but in real life, that's a horrible thought. You don't know what kind of violent people you might be in there with, right? And it's a terrible environment, and you're locked in there, and you're in a jail cell. You can't get out. You can't go do what you need to do. You can't talk to your attorney, and it's you're caged, right? So that can happen. That can happen just from the allegation. You don't have to be tried for that. You get arrested. You get put in a holding cell. You get questioned. You get put back in the holding cell. Your lawyer comes in. And you get questioned some more, and then you get put back in the holding cell until you're processed. If bail is posted, if you can afford to post bail, or somebody will help you post bail, and then you can go home. But some people get stuck in that cell until they have their hearing. Sometimes bail isn't allowed. Sometimes they don't have the money for it.
Then you go back into society. There's always going to be people that think no smoke without fire.
Yep. And
there's always and beyond that, for your own impact.
Yeah.
Someone moves away from you. Do they think I'm that person?
Yeah. You do have to worry about that. You have to worry about you're going to be looking around all the time at people and wonder, do they believe the allegation?
Did you see that video I pulled together, men's voices, and it's quotes of men.
Yeah.
From my survey, there's a quote in there where a man said he doesn't go anywhere. Dash cam.
Yeah.
Because if he'd have been prosecuted for the allegations that he's made against him, he would have got 5 years in jail.
Yeah. That actually.
So now he goes everywhere with a dash cam because he's terrified.
7 years in hell guy keeps receipts. For the longest time he kept a journal of everywhere he'd gone. Now, his situation is different. His accuser was labeled a vexatious litigant. She is on Ohio's list of vexatious litigants, and she cannot file a complaint against him again without getting permission from the judge that labeled her a vexatious litigant. But he still has a rough time just going places. For the longest time, he had a rough time going anywhere without a witness. He didn't like going places by himself. He'll do it now. But it was rough. And it's this kind of thing, the psychological effect of this, to even just, again, the very minor allegation I faced. When I have to go back into that environment where that happened to me, I never know if the actions that I take in that environment today are being judged
Yes.
by people who think that the officer might have been at least partly right.
Exactly.
And anytime there's any conflict in that environment that I'm involved in, I always have my doubts as to whether people are engaging in a bias against me when they think about my side of the conflict. Or looking at that conflict as confirmation of the previous allegation. Because it was just the two of us there. There were no witnesses. Nobody could vouch for either one of us. And that, again, is this tiny little misdemeanor, that is gone. I can't imagine how it would be with something that is a social taboo, a real social taboo like rape or beating somebody that is weaker than you, beating a woman when you're a man, which isn't necessarily the same as beating someone that's weaker than you.
We know, we all know that this narrative that is, violence against women is normalised. I'm from a UK perspective, but in prison, we assume as a society there's some really horrible people in there that have done some really horrible things. I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's the assumption. That's the societal assumption. In those places, if you are a rapist, Peter, move you from the general population, because those horrible people that have done horrible things harm you because you've committed those crimes.
Exactly.
So how is this normalized?
Right. Clearly, even in an environment where people's morals and ethics are compromised in comparison to the rest of society, it's a social taboo to commit rape or to beat women. And it's something that feminists don't even acknowledge that, right? They won't even acknowledge that. But that is
it's truth. So
yep.
This is why I think absolutely to have this case, because to me what it showed, and I'm sure this rings true with anyone that's listening to this, is even Johnny Depp, a world-renowned star, amount of millions of money, life was decimated with allegations. Absolutely decimated.
And that was without her making a criminal allegation in court. That he didn't. He went through the court of public opinion. And what can happen to a man who faces an allegation made to the police, for instance, is in addition to everything that Johnny Depp went through, Johnny Depp's experience with this was a loss of both private and professional reputation, right? And his work relationships were decimated. His friendships would have been affected by this. This would cause stress-related problems, anxiety, depression, digestive issues, health conditions that he already has may have been exacerbated. It caused him to
probably his dependency on alcohol.
It caused him to develop or exacerbated existing bad habits into addiction, and that's all just without having the police even get involved, right? A guy who actually gets accused to police now faces false arrest. He faces at least a short amount of time. The initial arrest leads to a short amount of time in holding cell. The potential for being put in jail and kept in jail until after his hearing is over. While he's in jail, he can lose his job. It can still go through that, damaging his existing relationships. It can damage his professional reputation, like Depp's professional reputation was. It can, like Depp is never. He said he's never going to work with Disney again, right? That only happened because of this. That only happened because of this, right? It didn't happen because Disney is otherwise, a shitty company. Like, it didn't happen because Disney tried to manipulate Florida. It didn't happen because Disney has taken political positions on things. It happened because when he was accused, Disney didn't wait to find out whether it was true or not. They just dumped him. Like, I wouldn't go back there either. But that's also an avenue of work that he never has again, right? And, and then on top of all of that, there is the possibility of a false conviction. If a man is accused to the police and he is prosecuted, there is the possibility that exculpatory evidence will be withheld, or he won't be able to present exculpatory evidence, and the court will take the accuser at her word. And I worked with a guy who was trapped in Ohio for 8 years after a girl who made out with him in a public place with people walking by accused him of a crime that would have required him to have 3 hands. Like, literally accused him of doing 3 things simultaneously, each with 1 hand, that required the constant use of that hand. And 2 of them required strength and leverage, and he was shorter than she was. And his defense was a public defender, and the public defender negligently botched his case so badly that I would say this person should not be working as an attorney at all.
Wow.
And then the court system basically at every opportunity denied him recourse for him having been denied due process. So a person who faces a false allegation in a courtroom is at risk of false imprisonment, right? Falsely being put on an offender registry if it's a sex offense. And the publication of those registries, that's public. Their neighbors would find that out. Forced self-identification to neighbors. And then if they spend time in jail, the abuse factor you talked about, right? Then you have something else that's happened. And this is incredibly damaging. If a person is accused and convicted of intimate partner violence or sexual violence, they don't just put you in jail for that now, right? There are perpetrator programs that you have to participate in. And if you're innocent, they gaslight you. This guy he had to go through a perpetrator program for sex offenders. And anything he does or says as part of that program is admissible in court because it's a perpetrator program. His right? But the first thing that he is required to do is admit it. Right? Take responsibility for committing the crime. But if he does, that's held against him as an admission of guilt.
He's not complying with the court. I mean, what a Kafka trap.
Right? And imagine, just for a moment, right, you, let's say you get up in the morning, you get in your car, and you go to work, and you do your job, and you come home. And everything is normal for your day, and you remember it. You know for a fact those are the things that happened, right? Mm-hmm. And you're ordered. You're put into psychotherapy of some sort, and you are ordered to admit that you burned down your workplace. Mm. It's still there. You know it's there. You can drive by it. You can see it. Mm. There's nothing wrong with it. Every day you know it's there. But if you don't cooperate, you can't move on. You can't get out of probation. You can't get out of the program. You're not allowed to leave the area. You can't go home. You have to, it starts with admitting that you burned down that building that you work in. And if you don't admit that, you can't finish the perpetrator program. And if you don't finish the perpetrator program, you are perpetually on probation and stuck in that location. And they might even send you back to jail for refusing to cooperate, and they're threatening to do that. Right? And it sounds ludicrous, right? And you should be able to be, take in pictures and say, look, it's right there. There's the building. It's not burned down. But you can't do that with a rape.
No. And again, this is why this case was important, because what we've seen now coming in from the media is that taking a picture of the building, got witnesses that are capacity, such as law enforcement, that says, no, the building's still there, we've seen it. You will still say, building.
We lost that part. Here. They'll still say what?
Down the building. Because what we've got in this case is there is, from the horse's mouth, there is audio evidence of Amber admitting she is abusing him.
Yep.
Of admitting that when he leaves because she's starting a physical fight, she follows him and she continues that. There's evidence that, go on then, tell someone who's going to believe you. We've got it all there.
Yeah.
We can hear it. She's admitted that is her voice. Yet still the media is saying she's a victim and this is all about misogyny.
Yep. And, to this day, there are still people that believe her. And if she had made that allegation in court, this is one of the things I pointed out in that long-form video I did. I said there was hope with this case, with Depp, and it panned out that, that we were able to have that hope, and it turned out our hope was right. And our fears were, they were legitimate, but they were not realized. And I was celebrating that too. But in a criminal case, it's very possible that a significant amount of his exculpatory evidence would have been excluded, because there are laws shielding accusers in abuse cases. And since she was alleging rape, rape shield laws would come into play. And that makes it difficult to talk about some of the things that they talked about. And it's much more difficult in court to question a rape accuser's narrative. So
the victim blaming and stuff,
right? And then on top of that, there's a set of requirements that the judge has, in a criminal case, in terms of advice to give the jury, and it might not even have been a jury trial, depending on what allegations she made. There was no jury in the trial for the young man who was accused of the sexual assault that got him stuck in Ohio for 8 years. The guy with 3 hands, right? That he didn't have a jury. He just had a judge, and that really shouldn't happen. If your allegation is so non-serious, non-severe, that a judge can decide it without a jury, that you don't get the right to a jury trial, then the penalty shouldn't be as severe as a crime that you have a right to a jury trial for, right? And the other thing that happened with him, this is a young guy. This is a college kid, right? This is something that people don't realize either. A huge number of allegations that are made against men who are just entering adulthood or who have only been adults for a very short time, who are not fully grown up. People in their early 20s are very immature in comparison to people in their 50s, right? They have a lot less life experience. They still have a lot of things to learn about common sense and stuff like that, and it's partly because we baby our children, and partly because you learn your entire life. So as you age, you're going to get wiser unless you actively choose to ignore life lessons, right? So,
yeah.
But your character development is affected by this, right? You go through the bullying, the judgment, the embarrassment, humiliation, the gaslighting, the punishment, the imprisonment, the fines, and that's the other thing. You pay fines when you're convicted of a crime like this. On top of everything else, they make you pay money to be falsely accused, and you can't get that back. Even if you're later on you're acquitted, you're exonerated.
Yeah.
You don't get that back. All of the lost time, the ending of the course of study at that university, for instance, being barred from school activities, being limited in what type of jobs you can get, lack of associations with people, those all go into your character development and your psychological development, and they damage your self-image, they damage your emotional connection with other people. They can cause mental health conditions like anxiety and depression, post-traumatic stress. The 7 Years in Hell guy has PTSD, and it actually affects his ability to be employed. And it can affect your relationship with your family, if you have kids, or your ability to form a relationship and create a family.
Well, absolutely, especially when it's come from any kind of attachment.
Yeah.
Or where'd you go with that?
Yeah.
How do you know you can trust anyone? It is horrific. The notion that this is anything but harmful is ridiculous. And again, it needs pointing out. No, that's not true. Don't accept it.
Exactly.
And the word, the number 5, for example, the word misogyny is banted around now so often. I can't tell you the amount of times I've been called a misogynist.
Yeah. I get internalized misogyny. Yes, I had some for breakfast this morning.
Yeah, it's just making this shit up.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with misogyny. And what is actually, it's lost all meaning. Because you don't agree with somebody and they happen to be a woman, make it misogyny.
It's very manipulative, really.
It really is.
Yep. And, if you look at this in terms of men having an awareness, because I think most of the guys I know somebody who has been through a massive ordeal with a crazy woman. Everybody seems to... I know too many men that have experienced that personally. But part of it is because I've gotten involved in this stuff, but I know... I got a count in my head, actually, 5 or 6 different guys that have had experiences, a variety of experiences at the hands of women that have something wrong with them, where they've been falsely accused, and some have been convicted, some have been through just long-term ordeals, some have lost custody of their children, or had custody of their children limited, had to make concessions in regard to custody and property and divorce in order to avoid allegations that were false. All of this. Men know these things are coming when a false allegation is threatened. And when a woman turns to a man and says, "Get out or I'll say you hit me," or "Do this, give me this, or I'll say you hit me," "Have sex with me or I'll say you raped me."
Yeah.
Right? That is coercion. That is a woman using a threat of state violence. She's not threatening to be violent. She's threatening to use proxy violence, the most powerful proxy violence in a man's community, to punish him if he doesn't do what she wants. And it's very effective.
Yeah. And it just needs to, and just is a stupid word, but the pendulum has gone so far that what we saw in that case was the beginnings of it being able to swing back, because I've never heard anybody that is either MRA, someone that just supports equality, or someone like myself that researches everything, and there's a massive gap in the research for male victims. Or there isn't a gap as far as research is concerned, but there's a gap as far as acknowledgement is concerned. I've never heard any of those gambit of people ever try to dismiss or devalue female victims. Ever. But I've always heard it coming from the other direction. Oh, not as much as women, not as bad as women, not as many as women, not as... Why? Why set up that competition? And I can absolutely 100% tell you for why. Dobash and Dobash did the book Violence Against Wives in, I think, if I look, it is 1979. And on the preface, the first page, half of the first sentence, but I'm going to read out the first sentence of this book that is influenced so many people, to the point that I think there was a dinner last weekend where the Dobashes were present and they got a standing ovation. And this is the first line of this seminal book that everyone uses. And this is what it says. The use of physical violence against women in their position as wives is not the only means by which they are controlled and oppressed, but it is one of the most brutal and explicit expressions of patriarchal dominance.
Jeez. So
the reason everything is set up this way is because in the central tenet of this dogma, physical against women sits as the poster child for what they call patriarchal dominance. So if they let go of that, to topple all the other premises it have in there. So if you topple this patriarchal dominance, misogyny doesn't exist. Victimization loses its currency. If you start to then say, oh, women are abusers, patriarchal dominance, it removes women from the oppression category and catapults them firmly into the darkness of perpetrator.
Yeah.
This text is quoted so often. If you don't put Dobash and Dobash into any kind of research into female victims, then you haven't actually done your reading. And that's the first sentence of this book.
And just to remind everybody, and highlight it in case you haven't seen the long form video that I did about the Depp case. Patriarchal dominance theory, and there is a patriarchal dominance theory that is as valid as patriarchy theory. So it's conjecture. It's based on feminism's patriarchy conjecture, and it holds that It's a population-wide allegation of abuse, basically. It's usually described by feminist academics in terms of male society using power, authority, and violence to manifest and maintain institutionalized and social dominance over women. So, like all the rules, all of the laws and the policies, all of the institutional environments are designed specifically to give men power over women under this theory. Right? Feminists apply this specifically to intimate partner and sexual violence as a means of justifying their choice to disregard evidence of female perpetration, and also to disregard evidence of false allegations. Right? They want to focus on the idea of the male perpetrator, the female victim, and the idea that when a woman says she's abused, it's because a man was using abuse to control her as part of the overall male population's patriarchal dominance of the female population. So this is like, it's one of the reasons why I say there is no good feminism. Feminism is based on these ideas, and even though there are third wave feminists that are flabbergasted by the second wave's behavior in terms of falsifying evidence in order to make these claims and everything, they will still cite them. Right? When you give them the information about Mary Koss, for instance, and how she defined rape to include instances where a woman made an explicit decision to engage in sex under conditions that she initiated, but that can be, in vague questioning, can be wrongly interpreted to be similar or the same as conditions where, like, a man takes advantage of a disadvantage she has and coerces her, right? And to exclude situations where a woman was a perpetrator and a man was the victim, and there was an explicit incident of sexual aggression and sexual assault, right? So they can learn that, and they can learn that the 1 in 4 statistic, the 1 in 5 statistic is all based on that kind of research. But they will still cite those statistics as valid, even after learning that. They'll be like, well, that was terrible, and that kind of thing shouldn't be done in research. But it's almost like
it's dogma.
Yeah.
It's dogma. I remember getting into, when I first joined Twitter, getting into various bats and all sorts of things, and regurgitating all these different quotes and references and putting lists and lists of stuff up. And then it just became exhausting. So I'd get to the stage where I'd just say to someone, if I give you, when they went citation needed, well, I can give you them, but if I give you these citations, are you actually going to read them?
Yeah.
And that would usually trigger them into patriarchal handmaiden or pick me or whatever crap they were going to call me at the time. So I get to the point now where I think, oh, you're an entry level.
Yeah.
In this perspective, because you're quoting the basic dogma, you're doing the 1 in 4 whatever, blah 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 blah. I'm just going to leave you to it, because you're so wrapped up in that dogma that it wouldn't matter if I showed you right in front of you this happening in the direction that opposes your belief system. You're still not going to see it.
Yeah.
You are actually to it.
These are the people that you could lead to the spot on the street across from the building that you were accused of burning down. And they could look at it, they could see people going in and out of it, and daily activity continuing to take place there, and they would acknowledge, well, clearly the building is still there. But my dogma says you burned the building down, and therefore you must have done it. And
that must be a different building.
Yeah, if you press them on it, like, they completely don't associate the existence of the building with the fact that it couldn't have been burned down. They will try to make up a story. Well, it must have been rebuilt. Well, you could even prove to them the building has not been altered in 100 years. It's been there for 100 years. It was there before you were born. Nothing's ever happened to it. show them the date imprinted on the cornerstone and all of that. And they would still go into mental gymnastics to figure out how to justify believing that clearly you burned that building down, even though it's still there. And that attitude leads to this idea that, again, men who are concerned about false allegations, you can prove to these people false allegations are not necessarily rare. And even if they were rare, they really can't be ignored because they're not harmless. It is an egregious crime to level a false allegation to police officers, to lie to the police officers and go into court and lie and so on. But then they'll suspect you must have done something. Well, maybe you didn't hit her, but maybe you were so abusive that she was afraid of you. Well, maybe you didn't hit her first, but she was engaging in preemptive self-defense because she knew you were going to hit her eventually.
I know. Can you believe this stuff?
Exactly.
Now, I mean, the bizarre thing is that can happen. Can happen. Someone gets so tense and this, that, and the other. But to use it, the definition of victim blaming. What did you do to make her hit you?
Yeah. It's just insane.
It's just, it's just bananas. But and it does. Number 6 on our myth. I think we've said it all the way through this. All this dogma, all this gaslighting, all this narrative is doing is not only harming the very people it professes to protect, but it's harming victims.
Yeah. So number 6, remember, number 6 is admitting some allegations are false hurts real victims, so we can never talk about this problem. And so what...
Because what happened here is they're now saying that Johnny Depp has really impeded on the Me Too movement. Yeah?
Yep.
No, he hasn't. Everybody can see that what's happened here is evidence has been used to help him win his case. The only person, and consequently people,
right,
that are knocking back this Me Too movement or how female victims coming forward and stuff, are Amber Heard, that's pumping out this crap.
Right.
They are the ones, the people that are
the people that are what?
Pretending.
Yeah.
To protect women are the ones that are actually harming them.
Yeah, and when you look at this, that number 6 there, that actually is 2 myths in one. And the hidden part of it, the part that people don't want to say out loud, the quiet part, is, if you say, admitting some allegations are false hurts real victims, which feminists tell us all the time. You can't talk about this because it'll discourage real victims from coming forward. Right?
It's a guilt trip.
The target of a false allegation is the real victim.
Yes.
This is something that feminists will not admit. If you are a target of a false allegation, you are a crime victim. It is a crime to lie to police during an investigation. And during an investigation includes the very first moment that you start speaking to police. When you make the allegation, that is lying to police during an investigation. In the UK, I think it's interfering with police or wasting police time or something like that. It's a crime to do those things. When you walk into a police station and you tell the officer a crime was committed against you, you set off an investigation. That's their job. They have to do that. You are now wasting police time. Right? That is a crime.
Yes, it is a crime, but
the target of that allegation is the crime victim. But nobody, except for the men's rights movement, talks about victims of false allegations as victims.
No.
And then, on top of that, it makes everybody who reports crime of that type look like a potential liar. Right?
Yeah.
Which, you should always be skeptical of an allegation. An allegation has to be investigated. There are a million reasons why, including the fact that, well, I know at least one real life story, and this was not something that happened to one of my friends. This was something that one of my friends had to deal with because she was the only one who knew what really happened, right? She went to a party with one of her friends. Her friend got plowed out of her gourd, just absolutely drunk. Went up to an upstairs bedroom in the house to sleep it off. Was in there with a guy who had gone in there to sleep it off. There was no place else for her to go. So she just laid down in the same bed, went to sleep, and she was raped. And she assumed that the guy that was in there with her did it. And somebody else saw that guy leave the room. But my friend saw another guy go in and come out of that room. And didn't think anything of it at the time, because she didn't know her friend was in there. Well, it was that guy. That was the perpetrator.
Oh, God.
Right? So, comes the victim, makes this allegation, she goes to the police. She went through the process. This is before there wasn't DNA evidence used, so I don't think DNA evidence was available because she did go to the hospital. But of course, the guy that was accused was innocent, and it was assumed then that she had just had sex with somebody and then accused this guy of rape, when in reality somebody else had committed the crime.
Yeah.
Right? And because she was a victim, she went through what feminists say victims go through. Well, feminists would have solved the problem by making it so that her allegation couldn't be questioned. Then there would have been two victims, right? The guy that she accused was not the guy that committed the crime. And this isn't something that is necessarily all that rare. It's a 25-year-old study now, but the FBI had a study where they did analysis, DNA analysis of some cases where there had been convictions, and the conviction was in doubt, and it was based on other forensic evidence. Like they used to use hair comparisons and stuff, and it's been discredited now because hair from different people can look very similar under a microscope, and yet hair on the same head, you could take hair from two different parts of my head, and if you just pick two of them out, that would look, even before I started going gray, even before I developed a significant amount of gray, thickness was very different. I've got some hair that's curly and some hair that's straight. I have some hair that's very fine and some hair that's like almost as thick as pubic hair. And you could exonerate me of a crime I committed by comparing some of my hair to some of my other hair. And you could convict me of a crime I didn't commit by comparing some of my hair to hair of a person who is from a different race. But if you look at DNA, you'd figure out real quick that it's not the same hair. And that study found that 1 in 4 out of the examined cases, the person who was convicted was innocent. And now it doesn't necessarily mean the crime was not committed. And this was rape cases, by the way. That doesn't mean the crime wasn't committed, but it does mean that guy didn't do it. Or at least the evidence they had showed that the conviction was incorrect. that guy was not proved to have done it when they thought he was. And so it is very possible for an instance like that to happen. And, there's also been instances where a woman has had sex with somebody and then accused another guy, or has had voluntary sex with somebody and then accused him of rape because she didn't want to get caught cheating. And so when you're dealing with an allegation in a he said, she said case, there are going to be instances where women are going to make those allegations, and everybody's going to kind of assume, well, this is just another one of those cases where she regrets it, and some of those cases, that's not the truth.
No.
And, and the same thing, male victims have a hard enough time coming forward in an environment that is in any way supportive of victims. But coming forward in an environment where we've seen, accuser after accuser lie, and cases be far more complex than feminists make them out to be. And already there's a bias against male accusers.
Yeah.
Now they also have to contend with the perception that maybe they're just embarrassed about what happened. And in particular, if a guy is maybe secretly bisexual and portrays himself as either straight or gay, and then gets raped by somebody of the gender he doesn't admit to being attracted to, and then people may come out and say, well, maybe you're just embarrassed to have had sex with that person. And if it's a guy, because he's already facing an uphill battle getting people to have compassion for his situation, same thing with...
To be perfectly honest, it's a legitimate fear.
Yeah.
And
you've lost sound there again.
Sorry. It would be difficult to someone on what we know, a male victim, and I understand it's difficult for female victims, but there's an additional barriers for men, as you're quite rightly pointing out. It would be difficult for me to say, go and report this, you'll be believed.
Right. No, if I was having to counsel somebody that was a victim and was male, I would take him to the hospital, and I would go with him if he was going to report, because I wouldn't want him to have to do that alone.
No, not at all.
I would be afraid that he wouldn't be believed.
There are obviously the contacts, but there are organisations, one in particular, that I would absolutely trust to help male victims, which is Mankind Initiative.
Yeah.
I would absolutely trust them to help them. But there's others that are set up as services to help male victims that I would say, don't go near it.
Yeah.
What it says on the facade isn't underpinned by their principles or their guidelines or their working practices. It's not worth the risk.
In fact, here in the United States, here in Dayton, I wouldn't go to any of the local victims advocacy agencies. I would contact the National Coalition for Men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's not just the fact that they put themselves at risk as re-traumatization from secondary victimization. It's the fact that often they are, as a victim, it is twisted so they become the perpetrator.
Yeah. And it is...
she wouldn't have hit you if you didn't do this. Again, we're back where we were. I wouldn't risk it if I was a man and I wasn't sure of the agency I was walking into.
Yeah, it's particularly dangerous in regard to agencies that claim to serve both sexes, because when they make those claims, a lot of times when you contact the agency, you get referred to a batterer program.
Yeah.
And in addition to real victims not being able to get help, and in particular men who are real victims not being able to get help, you also have the situation of, in terms of two-way domestic violence, and we've talked about this a lot, right?
Yeah.
About 2/3 of domestic violence is two-way, and about 2/3 of one-way domestic violence is female perpetrated unilaterally, right? And about 2/3 of two-way domestic violence is female initiated. And it's, if women don't recognize themselves as perpetrators and their targets as victims when they engage in violent aggression for the purpose of controlling their partner, or for the purpose of acting out their anger in a given circumstance without thinking about its impact on their partner, in those relationships with two-way violence where women initiate violence, they are more likely to get injured. And this is something that isn't discussed much. Like, we hear that statistic all the time, right? That's discussed. But the question becomes why? And the answer is this. You know, if you've been a person that gets into fights and stuff, if you've been a person that maybe is a bit of a scrapper, you know this, right? If you are the initiator of violence and you're in a situation where you know the other person's not going to fight back, or you're surprising them, you have the time and the mindset, the thought process, to have control over your degree and scope and severity of what you're doing. You're not throwing a wild punch. You can calculate your violence, right? That is, I guess, the best way I can put it. But if you're in the moment where you are defending yourself, or you are taking wild swings because you are angry and outraged, or you're trying to escape violence, you have less ability to calculate your physical actions. If you're not a trained fighter, if you're not somebody with a significant amount of experience in handling that type of situation, or if you just don't have any talent at it, right? Maybe you have, the fighter equivalent of ADD, or whatever. You just can't calculate what you're doing. You are more likely to take that wild swing and hit harder than you intend to, or hit in a more vulnerable location than you intend to, and cause damage that you didn't intend to cause, especially if you're bigger, stronger, smarter, faster, right, than the person that you're fighting with. So when a woman backs a man into a corner, or pursues him from room to room until he explodes, or puts him in a situation where he's in fear for his life, points a gun at him, puts a knife to his throat, chases him down with a bludgeoning weapon, pours boiling water on him, she puts herself at risk of dealing with that panicked self-defense, or the explosive rage that comes from being outraged that someone is doing this cruel and inappropriate thing to you. And so, of course, injury is more likely to happen.
Yeah, but and the reaction from pain. The thing with boiling water always.
Oh yeah.
Just gets it's horrible, but and here is the fact that Amber Heard was diagnosed, full assessment by a qualified doctor, as having two personality disorders: borderline personality disorder and histrionic personality disorder.
Yeah.
And I know there's now people saying, oh, they don't exist, it's just made up. They don't seem to do that with all the other disorders that are in the DSM, but they seem to do it with anything that's diagnosed against a woman that is clearly behaved badly.
Yeah, there's the only other group I know of that does that is pedophiles are trying to claim that pedophilia is not a mental disorder, right? What company to be in right there, to claim that your disorder isn't real.
Borderline personality disorder is, and I think Dr. Curry said this, is aligned with instability in relationship, instability in your emotions. You go from loving someone to absolutely detesting someone. There's all that kind of instability going on there.
Right.
And histrionic personality disorder is about needing attention.
Yeah.
So you can imagine that those two personality disorders make quite a heady blend. And I imagine that, and again, I'm not making excuses, but these are reasons, and there's a big difference between reasons and excuses. I imagine if that is the case, and I'm surmising from what we've seen on the evidence that is the case, but if that is the case, that will be causing Amber Heard distress to live like that. It will be causing her so much distress that I have no doubt she will be feeling physical pain. So denying the fact that she behaves that way, and she behaves that way in an abusive manner, means that she won't get the support that she needs to live life without those feelings.
Yep.
Because she's a perpetual victim. She doesn't need to change. It's something that happens to her. She doesn't do anything about this, which means they are effectively sentencing her to live her life in distress.
And to never be able to form a functional relationship with a partner with whom she can have mutual love and trust and companionship without this level of conflict that leads to abuse and pain and suffering and eventual destruction of the relationship. And when it comes to two-way violence, where you have a primary abuser and then the other person fighting back, and you can say, obviously the person who is initiating violence, when someone has to defend themselves against you, you're not a victim for that. But you still experience distress, you still can experience injury, you still can experience pain and suffering, and it is still damaging. If in the course of defending themselves against you, your victim gives you a concussion, it doesn't matter that you're not a victim, that you caused this problem. You still have a concussion, right?
Yes.
Or a broken arm, or a broken rib, or like if you get into a fight and fall down the stairs, the fractured wrist or whatever from trying to grab the railing, like all of those things that can happen have still happened. How they happened doesn't change the nature of the injury in terms of it's still an injury, and you still have to recover from it. It will still hurt, and you will still have whatever handicaps it causes while you're injured, and whatever permanent effects are left from it. And if you are a person who creates this situation repeatedly, and you end up with repeated concussions, you can end up with a syndrome that actually causes you to be unable to stop the behavior. It's post-concussion syndrome causes a whole lot of different problems that are very difficult to overcome. And it removes, in some ways, your ability to be rational. It's not, not that everybody that has that problem, can't be trusted, but
no, it'll manifest ways, but it's permanent.
Yeah, and it can be.
But here we have someone who is clearly, in a way, that is detrimental to herself as well as others.
Exactly. And we can't tell her, under feminist dogma, to change her behavior, right? So,
blame, isn't it?
Yeah. And the way I look at this, is I look at this the same way that I would look at it if you had a friend that had a habit of, hitting themselves in the head with a hammer for fun.
Yeah.
Or whenever they got frustrated. They get frustrated about something, they start hitting themselves in the head with a big mallet, right? Your first impulse is going to be to get them to stop hitting themselves, right? You can't do that with somebody who is initiating violence that ends up being two-way violence and causes problems in their own lives, right? Mm. And even if we didn't give a shit about men, which obviously we wouldn't be here if that was the case, right? But let's look at this from the perspective of completely mercenary feminists, if they give a shit about women. Right? Why would you want to trap people in that situation?
Yeah, exactly.
Therefore, you have to be able to talk about false allegations. You have to be able to talk about the complexities of intimate partner and sexual violence. You have to be able to get women to take accountability for their perpetration and for lying. Because if you don't do that, you put women in danger of engaging in patterns of behavior that are detrimental to their own lives.
Yes.
And of course, when we talk about that on say Twitter, the internalized misogyny accusation comes out. The pick-me nickname comes out.
This week I'm a patriarchal handmaiden, I've decided. So.
Oh, yes. The patriarchal handmaidens. We must be in relationships with abusive men that we're defending, which... that one actually, it kind of pisses me off, because I am in a relationship with a man whose previous relationship, it was one of those one-way abusive relationships with the woman as the perpetrator. And most of the overwhelming majority of the abuse was psychological. There's a limit to how much hand-to-hand combat can impact somebody that is more than twice your size and more than twice your weight. But it hurts inside in a way that, if you're a gentle person, my husband is one of the most kind and gentle people I've ever met. I look up to him for that, because I'm not as kind and gentle as I should be, in my opinion. One of my big flaws, I have a temper, and I don't show it very often, but I have a temper like you wouldn't believe. I had to go to therapy for control over my temper, to gain control over my reaction to my temper. I still get mad. And it's mellowed with age, and it's mellowed with the steroids wearing out of my system over the years. But it's still there. And, I have the capacity to be the Karen from hell. The Karen meme. You wouldn't... Seriously. I can be a terrible person if I allow myself to ignore my sense of responsibility, my ethics, my morals, and just ride the wave of anger. And women have, all kinds of excuses for doing that. Women, that gets excused all the time, right? My husband doesn't do that. He has a huge amount of self-control. And I've never seen him get mad and yell at somebody. I've never seen him say things with the intent to cut somebody down. He doesn't have a mean bone in his body. I'm sure if somebody attacked his family in front of him, then he'd find that mean bone real fast. He'd protect us. But
Yes.
he put up with behavior that was just unbelievably egregious toward himself. And, I watched how he dealt with it. One time his ex refused him contact with his children for the umpteenth time, on a day when, we'd been really looking forward to it. The promise was, okay, this time you're going to get to see the kids. And she incorporated another man into keeping him from seeing the kids. And the kids, he could see the kids begging, just let us go with Dad. And it hurt. And it hurt on a profound level.
Yeah.
And, she threatened to call the cops and have him removed from the property when he was supposed to have the right to take the kids that weekend for a visit. And so he finally, he came to see me and our son, and we went to a local street fair, and they had one of those, you can beat this car with a I think it was like a 10-pound or a 20-pound sledge for $1. They take, it's a charity thing. They get a car that's like really old and is going to go to a junkyard. And you can break out the windows and beat on the metal and, the parts that nobody's going to claim. They'll take out things like that can be used, and then it's just after that they just tow it in there, and he's doing this, like he gave the guy $5. And in the midst of it, this is an old car. It's a car made during the 80s, so this is not an aluminum vehicle. This is a steel vehicle. The door was bent and the window frame started to get in his way. And he grabbed a hold of the frame and just bent it down like a hanger, like a wire hanger. Like, this is a piece of steel. Like, I married a guy that could bend steel with his bare hands like Superman, right? I've never seen him do anything like that toward another person.
Yeah.
Like, he took it out on a car, and that's the only time I've ever seen him act in anger. And he drove 80 miles and walked around with us, with that anger under control, that pain and hurt under control, and consciously chose a controlled situation to release that energy. And men do that every day, all the time.
Yeah.
From the time boys do that every day, all the time. Little boys do that from the time they start hearing ladies first, right?
Yeah.
And then women grow up and treat them like animals.
Yeah, and then put hashtags all over social media like kill all men and all that garbage.
Yeah. And it's like, the reason, I mean, that in a nutshell, that description, that story gives you, you can tell, I think, how much I look up to my husband. Because I don't know that I could do a tenth of the self-control that it took for him to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's soul destroying, that.
Yeah.
Having to deal with that. But he managed it, and this is the bizarre thing. We expect men to manage it, yet we let tantrums.
Yep.
And we have a bit of a laugh. We call them Karens or whatever. But man did that. How outraged we would be as a society.
Yeah. If men did what Karens do, what the Karen meme shows, they would be, well, for one thing, harassment laws would change. It wouldn't have to be a pattern of behavior anymore, right?
Yeah.
And like, can you imagine going to school and you're a little, maybe 8-year-old in a second grade classroom, sitting next to a boy with a T-shirt that says "Girls are stupid, throw rocks at them."
Oh, I know.
Right? Just and having a girl or a boy at recess come up to you and say, I can hit you because I'm bigger and stronger than you, but you can't hit me back because you're small and weak, right? Because boys have that with girls. Girls will come up and they'll say, I can hit you because I'm a girl and you can't do anything about it because you're a boy, right?
Where's consent in that situation then? It's outrageous,
right? It's equal bullying right there.
It's projection. When they're talking about this power and oppression stuff, it's projection.
Right. And these are conditions that we can't change if we can't admit that women and girls do use false allegations to control and abuse their targets.
Yes. Absolutely.
Because if we can't admit that, we can't talk about any of the situations where the situation is more complicated and the violence is two-way, or the behavior was consensual, and the girl is just upset and regrets it. If we can't talk about those situations, we cannot protect women from the consequences of ignoring their own agency, and we cannot protect men and boys from the consequences of being associated with a woman who doesn't exercise her agency or doesn't admit that when she does something, it's her fault.
Yeah. Accountability.
Right. So this all goes back down to the accountability gap. All things men's issues. Every single issue we have, even in tactivism, is an accountability issue. We act like moms and dads that act on myths are not accountable. We act as though doctors who lie are not accountable. We act as though the people that have a skin trade in baby foreskins are not accountable.
Oh, and what is that about?
Selling human flesh is like disgusting enough, but when you stole it from a baby, and you had tortured the kid to get it, and that accountability is the most important thing. Every single one of these harmful myths, the idea that false allegations are rare, is an accountability issue, because we cannot hold women accountable for lying. We cannot recognize how frequently they lie. The idea that false allegations are harmless, because we can't associate the consequences of a lie with the liar if the liar is female.
Yeah.
And the idea that if the allegation is false, the accused has nothing to fear. We can't again associate the consequences of the lie with the liar, and we can't associate the damage to the target with the liar, right? And the idea that the accused is never truly innocent, even if the allegation is false. We can't associate the malice behind the lie with the liar if we can't hold her accountable, right? And the idea that skepticism is misogynistic if the accuser is a woman.
Yeah.
Like, we're exempting women from normal standards for evidence under that. Yeah. They can't be accountable for proving their case. And the idea that, the use of real victims, real crime victims, as a shield for false accusers. Some allegations being false, getting called an attack on real victims, right? Is, again, we can't hold the accuser, the liar, accountable for the things that she's done, because
and the harm she's caused for other victims,
because some other woman might be disbelieved. Like, it's bull.
Some mythical woman.
Yep, some mythical woman. And it's all the whole effort in this goes back to not wanting to recognize that when a woman engages in an action, when she does something, the thing that she did is her fault.
Yeah, and it's, absolutely. When you go back to the dogma, it's all about power and oppression.
Exactly.
And how they frame it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you just take one element out, and suddenly it's not about a brutal demonstration of patriarchal oppression. If you remove that, which is domestic abuse and false allegations and all the stuff involved in that, as soon as you remove that, the whole thing topples.
Yeah.
And that's what they're protecting.
Yep. And, of course, we have to be skeptical of some other things as well. Like, we know that there are organizations that are organized around the idea of protecting women or supporting women who have made allegations of abuse and have to go through the court system and everything, right? That take in a lot of money. And the people that work in those organizations get paid most of it. That most of that money does not go toward paying the expenses of running the building or buying, food or paying court expenses. It goes to salaries.
Yes.
And if there are fewer consumers of their services, they are less legitimate as organizations. They're less needed. Right? And if there are a lot fewer, if the problem gets addressed in a way that reduces the overall incidence of intimate partner violence, some of those organizations will end up not having any consumers. They won't have women who need their services. Or it may end up in a situation where the number of women needing such services is small enough that you don't need a building. You might end up, in a future where if a woman is in that situation and she goes to police, instead of having all of these different services, she gets a voucher to go stay someplace while she gets on her feet, where she'll be away from the perpetrator and start a new life. And like we try to do for men. And all those people and all those salaries might just see the money dry up. Yep, all those mortgages, all those fancy cars they drive, and all that might just all dry up. So they have to perpetuate the cycle themselves. And therefore they cannot acknowledge causes that, if you address those causes, might reduce that violence. Which is a horrible thing to think about, right?
It's horrible. It's using victims as cattle.
Yeah. But I think that is part of what is happening.
I do. It's gone into, certainly with the media and stuff, it's gone into full blown protection mode.
Mm-hmm.
But the great thing is everyone can see it.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that people being able to see it will lead to enough widespread public skepticism and widespread public outrage over the flaws in the system that we'll see some reform.
Me too.
So
sorry to say.
Hey, that's a good Me Too. I'm going to be honest. I really don't think a whole lot of the Me Too movement. I think the Me Too movement is not the best approach for giving victims of intimate partner and sexual violence a voice. And part of the reason is because there's no vetting of those allegations. They're just made publicly, and we're expected to believe the accuser and react against the accused based on a shared story without any evidence or without examining any evidence. And that's bad. That's cancel culture at its worst. How do you know that every single one of those stories is accurate? And how do you know that every single one of the targets of those stories was malicious?
here's the other thing, and shock horror, I'm going to be controversial. What percentage of those stories?
I lost you. What percent of those stories was the last thing that I heard?
Okay, what percentage of those stories person know what's coming and willingly enter into it for payoff?
Yeah, that's true. You look at the political ones, like the allegations against Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh, and that's not the first time that's been used.
No.
Like this is par for the course in politics, and it's going to be something that we have to deal with in politics until we stop tolerating it. Every candidate.
Yeah. We had it over here with a Scottish politician, and he was found to be innocent, but it destroyed him.
Yeah, and it's something that we've seen this, and it's not every single candidate like during my lifetime, but we've seen this with a number of candidates. You saw this with people who were already in office, like with Bill Clinton. There was none of the allegations against Bill Clinton were conclusively proved. And, because I was never a huge fan of the Clinton policies, it's one of those, you almost want there to be something that will get the guy out of office. But even at the time, I'm like, well, where's not even the smoking gun, just, where's the bullet holes?
Yeah.
And the only thing that was ever proved was that he cheated on his wife. And okay, so he definitely has a roving eye, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's done anything that was non-consensual. Right? And
exactly, yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that the women that accused him are lying, but it does mean that our society can't act on their stories because we don't know. And that, Clarence Thomas, his situation was definitely ridiculous. That allegation actually came out of a porn film. So it was completely made up. And the accuser, Anita Hill, made a career out of speaking on a topic of being a victim of sexual harassment in the workplace. Right? And so this is not new. This is old.
No.
And it's not always effective, but there have been... one of my commenters there just pointed out... Let me scroll back up here. Elusive Man said, speaking of Bill Clinton, Monica came out of the woodwork in support of Amber Heard. I don't know. I'm going to do my Gomer Pyle here. Surprise, surprise, surprise! I'm just like, come on. Yeah, Monica Lewinsky was not a victim in that situation. All right. I can't even call her a victim of the media because she put herself out there. She put herself in that situation, and she keeps coming back. Like,
really? Does she pop up now and again?
Yeah. Keep your head down. If you're not wanting to be a victim of media harassment, stop drawing media attention to yourself, okay? There's no reason for it. But yeah, in any case, that situation, the allegations against former President Trump, none of those were proved. The allegations against Biden were not proved. There's every single time you get this. It's one political party finding somebody to accuse the other political party. Matt Gaetz. Congressman Matt Gaetz had actually people try to blackmail him with false allegations, and they're still going after him with that. So there's just all kinds of bullshit in politics with this.
Yeah.
And as long as women cannot be held accountable for lying, it's going to continue. We're going to see our politics get interfered with, where the other party, the opposite party, finds somebody who's willing to lie, and then instead of the campaign being about the issues, it becomes about this lie and whether or not it's true.
And again, you get all that, oh, there's no smoke without fire nonsense.
Yeah.
And there we go again, round and round.
Exactly. So, it destroys our ability to vet politicians for character, whatever character they have. It destroys our ability to, like, I was really dissatisfied with the Kavanaugh hearings because it all became about that. And I feel like he got voted in as a Supreme Court justice because of that. And they didn't vet him for, as a judge, as well as they should have. And I would like to have seen the entire vetting of that candidate be about, is he going to be a good Supreme Court judge? Now it's very possible that he's going to be a great Supreme Court judge, that everything that he does is going to be just perfectly fine, all hunky-dory, but it really sucks that we didn't get to determine that before he got into that office, into that position, because the focus was on whether or not he did something that he was accused of doing in high school as a teenager, that he wasn't accused of until he got nominated to be a Supreme Court justice.
Oh, there's your other surprise.
Yeah, like that. So yeah, it's the last victim of a false allegation that is hurt. The last real victims of a false allegation that is hurt by the false allegation is overall society. We get deprived of our ability to evaluate and deal with situations like that when an allegation gets thrown into the mix.
Yeah.
We get deprived of our right to a well-operated justice system when we cannot vet allegations. Like I said, as a taxpayer, you, as a taxpayer, have the right to know that when you hand your money over to Uncle Sam isn't going to use it to fund a campaign to wrongly imprison your neighbor for something he didn't do. Right? You have the right to know that when Uncle Sam hands your money over to the cogs and wheels of the criminal justice system, that the criminal justice system is going to carefully steward the use of your money in the most effective way possible to actually enact justice, which is not getting a conviction or getting an acquittal, but a relentless search for the truth, and then acting appropriately on that truth under the law. And that may mean acquittal, that may mean a guilty verdict, but it should be correct. It should be based on evidence. It should be based on facts and logic, not on dogma.
No.
So we're going to go real quick through the super chats, and I think then we're going to end it because we've got a hell of a long sausage here. Yeah. I know we knocked Lauren out at some point. There's no way she stayed awake for this 'cause she's with her day job. So we'll start with the actual super chats from YouTube. So Richard Pierre gave us $1.99 and said, "Deborah, Lauren, Hannah," in all caps. And then later on gave us $4.99 and said, "Can you touch on acquittal being a euphemism for he got away with the crime?" And I think we kind of did.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's another one. Just imagine if guilty was just always a euphemism for she got away with a lie.
Yeah.
But yeah, feminists do treat it like that. And when the justice system is manipulated by evidence being excluded rather than attorneys being able to argue why it is or is not valid, and what the jury should take from seeing it. Whether they should be prejudiced by it or not. It does call into question the legitimacy of any verdict. Right? Ama-san gave us $2 and said, I gotta do this right. Kid, have you rehabilitated yourself? If you can find I think you can find Alice's Restaurant on YouTube. But if you can't, it's on the Arlo Guthrie's Greatest Hits album, and it's worth getting that album just for that. It's just classic. Albert Nader Retro gave us $5 and said, boycott Thor, Love, and Thunder. It mocks male victims of sexual harassment. Just check out a trailer Disney released.
Oh, okay.
Oh boy, Disney, enough said. Oh my god.
Yeah. Yeah. I bet they're kicking themselves now.
Yeah. Honestly, I didn't even know that was coming out, and I really haven't been keeping up with the Marvel movies. It's kind of hard to boycott something you're already not watching, but it doesn't surprise me they've done that. And it's traditionally done in Hollywood that sexual harassment is funny when it happens to a man, right? Just like violence is a funny response to sexual harassment when it happens to a man.
Yeah.
And that's been treated as comedy for a long time. You go back to Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Oh gosh, Artie, what was his last name? And Ruth Buzzy, and doing the sketch on the bench where she's the old lady and he's the old man, and he sits closer and closer and finally says something to her like, do you believe in the hereafter? And she says, why, yes. And he'll say, then you know what I'm hereafter. And then she'll hit him with her purse, and then there's the canned laughter, right? That sketch, that's an old classic. Yeah, it's not the harassment that's the punchline. It's the fact that she gets mad and hits him. And they went through a whole thing. That sketch was, they got married or they got engaged. There was supposed to be a wedding. I don't remember if they chose not to get married at like the last minute, but like they took that they really took that through a whole thing.
Brilliant.
Yeah, but. And in a way, it kind of makes fun of the human condition, but it's not allowed to go both ways, right? You couldn't turn it around, and if the punchline didn't happen, the rest of the sketch would not. Just a sketch that shows a guy sexually harassing a woman would not, have been laughed at. Not unless she hit him with her purse. And the same thing with men being sexually harassed. Like, if they did react, if he did grab a bag and hit her with it or something, like that would just make it people would get mad.
Big time.
Yeah. Then we have Richard Bier gave us $4.99 and said, in addition to the charge of wasting police time, the UK also has the felony of perverting the course of justice, which is probably I think the equivalent of our perjury charges if you lie in court.
Yeah. But I think the difference is that we also have perjury in court. Perverting the course of justice can happen all the way through the investigation. If you outwardly lie or do not disclose stuff, essentially you've got in the way of justice, the straight path of justice.
So we have filing a false complaint is a charge. Lying to police during an investigation is a charge, and then there is perjury as a charge.
Okay.
There's also contempt of court, which you can get for any manner of disrespect in the courtroom. So
same here.
So that's all of the super chats. So let's look and see if we got any super chows. I don't see any Rumble rants. And all right, and I'm missing the we have a buttload of chats, like different chats in our... Let's see if I can find the super chats. Come on. Sorry, guys. I am literally scrolling through... There it is. Through, I swear, a mile of... We have a big community, and it looks like we do not have any new super chows. So that's it. So...
Brilliant.
Yep. Well, I think we had people talking more to each other than giving super chats tonight, which is fine. But yeah, that's everything. And yeah, there were a lot of comments back and forth to each other. And we do have...
I'll have a read through them tomorrow.
Yeah. So, alrighty. Well, thank you very much for sticking out this long sausage with me, coming on to talk about this issue and everything. And thanks to everybody. Yeah. This was a great discussion. I'm really glad that we were able to have it. And thanks to everybody for sticking out the long sausage, listening to us. And Lauren tried. She did talk a little bit. It's just hard. Like I said, she does have a daytime job, so she gets up early in the morning, and it is Lauren's time and my time. It is 11:07 p.m. right now. Like, if I had to work tonight, I would have already needed to leave for work.
Yeah.
But I don't.
Yeah.
And thanks to everybody who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. And good night, all.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.